I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I should have left the office earlier. That's what I keep telling myself as I grip the steering wheel, my knuckles white in the dim glow of the dashboard. The clock reads 11:47 p.m. and the highway stretches endlessly before me, a ribbon of black cutting through the night. It had been one of those days where everything went wrong. Missed deadlines, angry clients, and a surprise visit from upper management had kept me chained to my desk long after everyone else had gone home. By the time I finally shut down my computer and dragged myself to the parking garage, the city had fallen into that eerie quiet that comes in the hours before midnight. Now, as I cruise down the empty highway, the fatigue of the day weighs heavy on my eyelids. I crank up the radio, letting some late-night talk show fill the car with chatter. Anything to keep me alert for the hour-long drive home. That's when I first noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I don't think much of it. It's just another car on the road, probably some other poor soul working late. But as the miles tick by, I realize it's staying a consistent distance behind me, not gaining, not falling back, just there. I ease off the gas a little, expecting the car to pass. It doesn't. Instead, it slows down too, maintaining that same gap. A prickle of unease crawls up my spine. I'm probably just being paranoid, I tell myself. Too many late nights and too much coffee have my imagination working overtime. Still, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I decide to test my theory. At the next exit, I signal and pull off the highway. The car behind me follows. My heart rate kicks up a notch. Okay, maybe they just happen to need this exit too. I navigate through a few turns in the small town, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. The headlights remain stubbornly present. This is ridiculous, I mutter to myself, trying to calm my fraying nerves. I pull into a 24-hour gas station, the harsh fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the darkness I've been driving through. I park near the front door, kill the engine, and wait. The car that's been following me cruises slowly through the lot. It's an older model sedan, dark in color. The windows are tinted, making it impossible to see the driver. As it passes my car, I catch a glimpse of the license plate, but it's too smudged with mud to read. My mouth goes dry as the car completes a circuit of the lot and comes to a stop at a pump opposite me. The engine cuts off, but no one gets out. We sit there, two cars facing each other in the pool of sickly light. My palms are sweaty on the steering wheel. Part of me wants to march over there and demand to know what's going on. The smarter part keeps me rooted to my seat. After what feels like an eternity, but is probably only a few minutes, I start my car and pull out of the lot. As I suspected, the other car's engine rumbles to life, and those headlights once again appear in my mirror. Now I'm sure I'm not imagining things. My mind races, trying to think of who might want to follow me. An angry client, a colleague with a grudge. But this feels different, more sinister somehow. I fumble for my phone, thinking to call the police, but my heart sinks as I see the no-service message glaring back at me. Of course, this stretch of highway is notorious for its dead zones. Panic begins to set in, my breath coming in short gasps. I need to lose this tail to get somewhere safe. I remember an old back road that should connect to the highway a few miles up. It's a risk the road is twisty and poorly lit, but it might be my best chance to shake my pursuer. I wait until the last second, then wrench the wheel to the right, tires squealing as I take the exit. In my mirror, I see the other car swerve to follow, nearly missing the turn. The back road is exactly as I remembered it. Narrow, with hairpin turns that have me wrestling the steering wheel. I push my car to its limits, taking curves faster than I should. The headlights behind me fall back a bit, and I allow myself a glimmer of hope. But as the road straightens out, that hope dies. The car is still there, gaining on me now. My speedometer is pushing 80, the engine whining in protest, but it's not enough. I blow past the turn that would take me back to the highway, too scared to slow down. I don't know these roads well, but right now, anywhere seems better than being trapped on the highway with my pursuer. The minutes stretch into what feels like hours. My gas gauge is dipping dangerously low. All this speeding is killing my fuel efficiency. The roads all look the same in the dark, and I've long since lost any sense of direction. I could be driving in circles for all I know, and still, those headlights remain in my mirror. I'm about to give up, to simply pull over and face whatever is coming, when I spot a sign for a small town ahead. Civilization, people, safety. I push my tired car just a little faster, but as I crest a hill, my heart plummets. The town, if you can call it that, is nothing more than a handful of dark buildings clustered around a single stoplight. And that stoplight is flashing red, no other cars in sight. I slow down, eyes darting frantically for any sign of life. There's a diner with a neon open sign, but the windows are dark. A gas station, closed. A small police station that looks like it hasn't seen use in years. I roll to a stop at the blinking light, my pursuer pulling up right behind me. This is it, I think. Nowhere left to run. That's when I notice movement in my peripheral vision. There's a figure standing on the corner, barely visible in the shadows between streetlights. My first instinct is relief. Another person, someone who can help. But as I turn to look directly at them, that relief curdles into fresh fear. The figure is unnaturally tall and thin, clothes hanging off them like they're nothing but a frame. And their face. In the intermittent red glow of the stoplight, I can see that where features should be, there's nothing but smooth, blank skin. A scream bubbles up in my throat, but before it can escape, there's a sharp rap on my window. I jump, my head whipping around. There's a man standing next to my car. He looks ordinary enough, middle-aged, slightly paunchy, wearing a rumpled suit. He could be any late-night business traveler, but the smile on his face is all wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. Car trouble? He asks, his voice muffled through the glass. His eyes don't match his smile. They're cold, calculating. I shake my head mutely, too terrified to speak. "Oh, come now," he says, his tone chiding. "No need to be shy. We've come all this way together, after all." My eyes flick to the rearview mirror. The car that followed me is empty, driver's door hanging open. "Why don't you come out?" The man continues, rapping on my window again. We have so much to discuss. I look back to the corner where I saw the impossible figure, but it's gone. Or maybe it was never there. I don't know what's real anymore. Now, the man says, his voice taking on an edge. "Don't be rude. We're all friends here." As if on cue, I hear car doors slamming. In my mirrors, I see more people emerging from the shadows, all wearing those same two wide smiles. They begin to surround my car, their eyes gleaming in the red glow of the stoplight. The man outside my window leans in close, his breath fogging the glass. "Last chance," he says softly. "Are you going to open the door, or are we going to have to open it for you?" I sit there, frozen, as hands begin to press against my car windows. The glass creaks under the pressure. Smiling faces peer in at me from every angle. The stoplight blinks red, red, red. And I realize, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that this long drive home is far from over. Story 2. The day Mr. Wilkins moved in next door was the beginning of the end, though we didn't know it then. My wife, Sarah, and I had lived in our little suburban home for 3 years, relishing the quiet neighborhood and friendly faces. We were that young couple everyone liked. Me with my startup job in the city, Sarah working from home as a freelance graphic designer. Life was good, predictable, until it wasn't. I remember the moving truck pulling up on a crisp Saturday morning in early fall. Sarah and I were out front, raking leaves, when we first laid eyes on our new neighbor. "Well, would you look at that?" Sarah said, leaning on her rake. "Guess the Peterson place finally sold." I shaded my eyes against the morning sun, watching as a hunched figure slowly made his way down the truck's ramp. He was ancient, mid-80s at least, with wispy, white hair and liver-spotted hands that trembled as he clutched a small box to his chest. "Should we go help?" I asked, already moving towards the old man. Sarah caught my arm. "Let's wait a bit. He might have family coming to assist." But as the morning wore on, no one else showed up. It was just the old man, shuffling back and forth from the truck to the house, carrying small boxes and odd bits of furniture. By noon, Sarah's kind heart got the better of her. "This is ridiculous," she declared, pulling off her gardening gloves. "I'm going over there." I followed, and that's how we met Mr. Wilkins. Up close, he looked even older. His face was a maze of wrinkles, but his eyes were a startling, bright blue. Alert and intelligent. "Well, hello there," he called out as we approached, his voice surprisingly strong. I was wondering when I'd meet the neighbors. "Mr. Wilkins?" Sarah asked, smiling warmly. "I'm Sarah, and this is my husband Tom. We live next door. We thought you might like some help with your things." The old man's face split into a grin, showcasing a set of perfectly white teeth. Something about that smile made my skin prickle, though I couldn't say why. "Aren't you too sweet?" he said. "I'd be much obliged. These old bones aren't what they used to be." We spent the next couple of hours helping Mr. Wilkins unload the truck. The whole time, he regaled us with stories of his life. He was a retired teacher, a widower, moving to our town to be closer to his daughter, though we never saw her. He was charming, funny even, and by the time we finished, Sarah was completely won over. "We simply must have you over for dinner soon," she insisted as we said our goodbyes. Mr. Wilkins beamed. "I'd be delighted. And please, call me Frank." As we walked back to our house, Sarah nudged me. "See, isn't he sweet? It'll be nice having someone to look out for." I nodded, but something nagged at the back of my mind. Maybe it was the way his eyes had followed Sarah's every move, or how his hand had lingered a bit too long when shaking mine. I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, he was just a harmless old man. The first few weeks were fine. Better than fine, actually. Frank quickly became a fixture in the neighborhood. He was always out in his yard, tending to a garden that seemed to spring up overnight. He waved to everyone who passed, and soon he was the darling of the street. It started small. Sarah mentioned offhand that she'd love to learn gardening, and the very next day, Frank was at our door with a pot of perfectly pruned roses and a book on horticulture. "Just a little welcome gift," he said, that too wide smile in place. Then it was cookies, home-baked and still warm, delivered just as Sarah was craving something sweet. A casserole appeared on our porch, the day I had to work late. Each time, the gifts were perfect, almost too perfect. "Isn't it wonderful?" Sarah gushed one evening. "It's like having a grandfather next door." I muttered an agreement. But the nagging feeling had grown into a persistent itch. How did he always know exactly what we needed? And why did I keep catching glimpses of him at his window, staring at our house? About a month after Frank moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound, a soft scratching coming from downstairs. I lay there for a moment, listening intently. There it was again. "Sarah," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Wake up. I think there's someone in the house." She stirred, blinking sleepily. "What, Tom? You're imagining things." But then we both heard it. A definite creak of floorboards. Heart pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat we kept by the bed and crept downstairs. Sarah closed behind me. The living room was dark, shadows looming in every corner. I fumbled for the light switch. The room flooded with light, revealing nothing. Everything was in its place. No sign of an intruder. "See?" Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. It was probably just the house settling. I wasn't convinced, but I let her lead me back to bed. As I was drifting off, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of a door closing. The next morning, things felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something in the house felt different. Objects seemed slightly out of place. A book on the coffee table I didn't remember leaving there. A chair angled differently than usual. "Sarah," I called out, "did you move stuff around last night?" She appeared from the kitchen, a puzzled look on her face. "No. Why?" I shook my head. "No reason. Just my imagination, I guess." But it wasn't my imagination when, later that week, I came home to find Sarah and Frank having tea in our living room. "Oh, Tom," Sarah exclaimed. "You're home early." Frank just popped by with some of his famous Earl Grey. Frank turned to me, that unnervingly wide smile in place. "Hello, Tom. Care to join us?" I declined as politely as I could, muttering something about work to catch up on. As I headed upstairs, I heard Sarah's laughter floating up behind me, punctuated by Frank's deeper chuckle. It made my skin crawl. That night, I confronted Sarah. "Don't you think Frank's being a bit much?" She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "What are you talking about?" "He's just being neighborly." "Neighborly is borrowing a cup of sugar. Not letting himself into our house when I'm not here," I countered. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "He didn't let himself in. I invited him over when he brought the tea. Honestly, Tom, what's gotten into you?" I tried to explain my unease, the feeling of being watched, the strange occurrences at night. But the more I talked, the more ridiculous it sounded. In the end, Sarah just sighed and said, "I was working too hard." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was losing it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Things came to a head a few weeks later. I had to go out of town for a conference, leaving Sarah alone for the weekend. I was a nervous wreck the entire time, calling her repeatedly to check in. "I'm fine, Tom," she assured me each time, a note of exasperation creeping into her voice. "Stop worrying. Frank's keeping an eye on the house for me." That was exactly what I was afraid of. I came home a day early, driven by a gnawing anxiety I couldn't explain. The house was dark when I pulled up, which was odd. Sarah usually left the porch light on. As I approached the front door, fumbling for my keys, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar. My heart leaped into my throat. I pushed the door open slowly, calling out, "Sarah, you home?" No answer. I moved through the dark house, flipping on lights as I went. Everything looked normal, but the silence was oppressive. Where was Sarah? In the kitchen, I found a note on the counter in Sarah's handwriting. Went to help Frank with some gardening. Back soon. Love, S. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by irritation. All this worry for nothing. I was about to call Sarah's cell when I heard it. A muffled thump from upstairs. Sarah, I called again, moving towards the stairs. That you? Another thump, louder this time. It was coming from our bedroom. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my earlier fear returning tenfold. The bedroom door was closed. I hesitated for a moment, then stilled myself and pushed it open. The room was dark, but I could make out a figure standing by the window. For a split second, I thought it was Sarah. Then the figure turned, and I found myself staring into Frank's bright blue eyes. "Hello, Tom," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "We've been waiting for you." Before I could react, something heavy struck me from behind. As I crumpled to the floor, my last conscious thought was of Sarah's note on the counter. It hadn't been in her handwriting at all. Story 3. The forest always seems quieter when you're alone. That's what I told myself as I trudged along the narrow trail, the weight of my backpack digging into my shoulders. The shadows were growing longer, the air cooler. I checked my watch. 6:30 p.m. Mike should have caught up with me by now. We hadn't planned to split up. The Whispering Pines Trail was supposed to be our big adventure. A 4-day hike through some of the most remote wilderness in the state. But Mike had fallen behind about an hour ago, complaining of blisters. "Go on ahead," he'd said, waving me forward. "I'll catch up at the first campsite." I'd hesitated, but Mike had insisted. "It's not like I can get lost. There's only one trail." Single quotes now, with the day fading and no sign of Mike. I was starting to regret that decision. I rounded a bend in the trail and stopped short. There, sitting innocuously on a fallen log, was a small, red toy car. I frowned, approaching it slowly. The car looked new, its bright paint untouched by the elements. What was a child's toy doing out here, miles from any road or campground? I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was heavier than I expected, made of metal rather than plastic. Vintage, maybe? I pocketed it, thinking I'd show it to Mike when he caught up. It would give us something to puzzle over around the campfire. As I continued down the trail, the toy car weighing in my pocket, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The forest seemed different somehow. The bird calls fewer, the rustling in the underbrush more deliberate. I found myself straining to hear Mike's familiar footsteps behind me, but there was only silence. Just as I was considering turning back, I spotted our designated campsite ahead. It was a small clearing, not far from a bubbling stream. Perfect for our first night. I shrugged off my pack with a groan of relief and set about making camp. By the time I had the tent up and a small fire going, the last light was fading from the sky. Still no sign of Mike. I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope for a signal, but the screen remained stubbornly empty. We were well and truly off the grid. As I sat by the fire, munching on a granola bar, I pulled out the toy car again. In the flickering firelight, its red paint seemed darker, almost blood-like. I set it down on a nearby rock, and for a moment, I could have sworn its tiny headlights gleamed. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake, my heart pounding. The fire had died down to embers, and the forest was pitch black. What had woken me? Then I heard it. A twig snapping, somewhere in the darkness beyond the campsite. "Mike," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "That you, buddy?" No response, but I could hear something moving out there, circling the clearing. I fumbled for my flashlight, flicking it on and sweeping the beam across the tree line. For a split second, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting the light, but when I looked again, there was nothing. Sleep was out of the question now. I rebuilt the fire, feeding it until the flames leapt high, pushing back the darkness. As I worked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The toy car was gone. I told myself I must have knocked it off the rock, but a frantic search of the area turned up nothing. It had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. The rest of the night passed in a haze of anxiety and exhaustion. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me on edge. By the time dawn broke, I had convinced myself that I needed to go back, to find Mike and get the hell out of these woods. I broke camp quickly, my hands shaking as I stuffed gear into my backpack. That's when I saw it. Half buried in the dirt near where I'd slept, a small object glinted in the early morning light. I bent down, brushing away the soil, and felt my stomach lurch. It was a pocket knife. Mike's pocket knife. The one I'd given him for his birthday last year, with his initials engraved on the handle. But Mike hadn't been here. I would have seen him, heard him, wouldn't I? I stood there, the knife clutched in my trembling hand, as the imprecations washed over me. Either Mike had been here while I slept, leaving no other trace of his presence, or I couldn't bring myself to finish that thought. With clumsy, frantic movements, I finished packing and set off back down the trail, my eyes darting everywhere, searching for any sign of my friend. The forest felt different in the daylight, less threatening, but somehow more surreal. The colors seemed too vibrant, the bird calls too cheerful. I'd been walking for about an hour when I saw it, a splash of red among the green underbrush. My heart leaped. Mike had been wearing a red t-shirt. "Mike," I shouted, crashing through the phones. "Mike, are you okay?" But it wasn't Mike. There, lying in a small clearing, as if carefully placed, was a red apple. It was perfectly ripe, its skin gleaming as if it had just been polished. I stared at it, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Wild apples didn't grow in this forest. And even if they did, they wouldn't look like this. Like something plucked straight from a fairy tale. Almost against my will, I found myself reaching for it. The apple was cool and smooth in my hand, impossibly perfect. I raised it to my nose, inhaling deeply. It smelled divine, sweet and tangy. For a crazy moment, I considered taking a bite. I was hungry, after all, and it looked so good. A sudden rustle in the bushes snapped me back to reality. I dropped the apple like it had burned me and spun around, heart pounding. There was nothing there, but I could have sworn I heard a faint, mocking laugh. I ran. I ran like I've never run before, blind panic driving me down the trail. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp, but eventually, I burst out of the tree line into a small parking area. A park ranger was just getting out of his truck. He took one look at my wild, bleeding face and rushed over. "Sir, are you all right?" "What happened?" The words poured out of me in a jumbled mess. Mike, the toy car, the knife, the apple. With every sentence, the ranger's face grew more concerned. "Okay, sir, I need you to calm down," he said, his voice steady. "When exactly did you last see your friend?" I told him, and he frowned. "That's not possible. This trail's been closed for maintenance all week. There shouldn't be anyone out there." I gaped at him. "What? No, that's not. We drove up yesterday. We parked right here." But even as I said it, I realized something was wrong. This wasn't where we had parked. The lot was smaller, the signage different. The ranger was speaking into his radio now, calling for backup, but I barely heard him. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of it all. How long had I really been in those woods? As the ranger guided me to his truck, promising to send out a search party for Mike, I felt something in my pocket. With trembling fingers, I pulled it out. It was the toy car, shiny and red, without a speck of dirt on it. And there, tucked into the tiny driver's seat, was a Polaroid photo. With a sense of creeping dread, I turned it over. The picture showed Mike and me, standing at the trailhead, grinning at the camera. But we weren't alone. There, lurking in the background, barely visible among the trees, was a figure. Tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long, too jointed. Its face was turned towards the camera, but where features should have been, there was only a blank, white oval. As I stared at the impossible photo, I heard it, faint but unmistakable, carried on the breeze, drifting from the dark heart of the forest, whispering. Story 4. The first night, I chalked it up to nerves. New job jitters, you know. But by the third night, I knew something wasn't right at Grayson Tower. It started innocently enough. A job posting for a night security guard at some fancy downtown office building. Great pay, easy work, perfect for a guy like me trying to make ends meet while finishing my degree. When I showed up for my first shift, the day guard, a burly guy named Frank, gave me a quick tour and a set of keys that weighed about as much as a small dog. It's a cakewalk, Frank said, clapping me on the shoulder. Just make your rounds every couple hours, keep an eye on the cameras, and make sure nobody's burning the midnight oil without authorization. You'll be fine. I nodded, trying to look more confident than I felt. The building was huge, 230 floors of gleaming glass and steel, most of it empty at night. As Frank headed out, leaving me alone in the cavernous lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were a little too deep, the silence a little too complete. But hey, a job's a job, right? The first few hours were uneventful. I made my rounds, footsteps echoing in the empty hallways, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Everything was quiet, normal, boring even. It was around 2 a.m. when I noticed the first oddity. I was doing a routine check of the 15th floor when something caught my eye. A desk lamp was on in one of the cubicles, casting a pool of warm light in the otherwise dark office. I frowned, approaching slowly. Frank had been clear. All employees should be out by 10 p.m., no exceptions. I rounded the corner of the cubicle, half expecting to find some overachieving intern passed out at their desk. The cubicle was empty. The chair was pushed in neatly, the desk clear except for a standard issue company mug. The lamp illuminated nothing but blank space. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No response. I reached for the lamp, intending to switch it off, but hesitated. Something about the scene felt wrong, like I was intruding on something I shouldn't. In the end, I left it on and hurried through the rest of my rounds, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up until I was back in the well-lit security office. I tried to put it out of my mind. Probably just forgot to turn it off, I told myself. No big deal. The next night was quiet, almost too quiet. I found myself jumping at every creak and groan of the building settling. When I got to the 15th floor, I braced myself, half expecting to see that lamp on again. The office was dark. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and continued my rounds. It was on the 23rd floor that I found the next strange thing. As I swept my flashlight across the executive suites, something glinted back at me. I moved closer, curious. There, sitting in the middle of the hallway, was a silver picture frame. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was heavy, expensive looking. The photo inside showed a smiling family. Mum, Dad, 2 kids. They looked happy. But what was it doing here, in the middle of the night, in a place it clearly didn't belong? I radioed down to the front desk. "Hey, did anyone turn in a lost photo today?" Static crackled for a moment before the reply came. "Negative. No lost and found items reported." I frowned, looking back at the photo. The family's smiles suddenly seemed fixed, artificial. I could have sworn the eyes followed me as I moved. Shaking my head to clear it, I tucked the frame under my arm. I'd turn it in to lost and found in the morning. As I walked away, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper, like someone calling out a name. But when I turned back, the hallway was empty. The third night, things got weird. It started with the elevators. I was in the lobby, watching the security feeds, when I noticed one of the elevators was moving. Floor by floor, it was going up. No stops, all the way to the top. Then down again. Up and down, up and down. I checked the lobby camera. Nobody had come in. I flipped through the feeds for each floor. All empty. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the bank of elevators. As I approached, I could hear the faint whir of machinery, the occasional ding as it passed each floor. I stood there, watching the numbers above the doors climb steadily. 28, 29, 30. Then descending. 29, 28, 27. When it hit the lobby floor, I stepped back, half expecting, I don't know what. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding. The elevator was empty. I must have stood there for a full minute, staring into the empty car. Then, slowly, I reached out to press the door open button, keeping the elevator there. That's when I saw it. A single, muddy footprint in the center of the elevator floor. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at my own shoes, clean and dry. This print was fresh, the mud still wet. I backed away, letting the doors slide closed. The elevator remained still, but I could feel it, like an unseen presence, watching me. I practically ran back to the security office, my mind racing. There had to be a logical explanation. A prank, maybe, but who would go to all this trouble? As I slumped into my chair, trying to calm my racing heart, a movement on one of the security monitors caught my eye. 15th floor, the same office as before. The desk lamp was on again, but this time there was more. As I watched, heart in my throat, a chair slowly pushed itself away from the desk. It rolled a few feet, then stopped. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was seeing things. When I looked again, the chair was back in its original position, but the lamp was still on, a beacon in the darkness. I should call someone, I thought. The police, maybe, or my supervisor. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. But as I reached for the phone, a strange lethargy came over me. My hand felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. I'll just rest my eyes for a moment, I thought. Just a moment. I jerked awake with a gasp. The security office was dark, the monitors showing nothing but static. How long had I been out? I fumbled for my flashlight, flicking it on. The beam seemed weak, barely penetrating the darkness that now felt thick, almost tangible. My watch had stopped. The phone was dead. Even my radio produced nothing but a low, ominous hum. With shaking hands, I pulled out my keyring. I needed to get out, to get help. This was beyond me now. But as I stumbled towards the lobby, I realized something that turned my blood to ice. The keys were wrong. Different shapes, different weights. These weren't the keys Frank had given me. I tried them anyway, desperation making my movements clumsy. None of them fit. I was locked in. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong, that shouldn't be possible in an empty building. Laughter. Children's laughter, echoing from somewhere above me. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam trembling as I pointed it towards the stairwell. The beam caught something, a flash of movement. A small figure darting up the stairs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" The laughter came again, louder this time. Multiple voices calling out playfully. "Come find us. Come play." Against every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, I found myself moving towards the stairs. The voices were compelling, drawing me in. I had to know, I had to see. As I climbed, the air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive. My flashlight flickered, the beam growing weaker with each step. Still, I pressed on. I don't know how long I climbed. It could have been minutes, could have been hours. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Finally, I reached a door. It looked different from the others. Older, made of heavy wood with a tarnished brass knob. This wasn't part of Grayson Tower. This shouldn't be here. The voices were clearer now, coming from just beyond the door. "We're waiting," they sang. "Come see," with a trembling hand. I reached for the knob. It turned easily under my grip. As the door swung open, my flashlight gave one final, feeble flicker. In that brief moment of light, I saw them. The family from the photograph, standing there, arms outstretched in welcome. But their faces, oh God, their faces. The light died, plunging me into total darkness. I felt hands, cold and impossibly strong, grabbing me, pulling me forward. The door slammed shut behind me, and Grayson Tower stood silent, waiting for the next night shift to begin. Story 5. I should have known better. That's what everyone says now, with that pitying look in their eyes. But when you're 16 and lonely, when the world feels like it's crushing you with expectations and insecurities, sometimes any lifeline looks good, even one that's too good to be true. It started on a rainy Tuesday. I remember because I was stuck inside, scrolling mindlessly through social media, feeling sorry for myself. Another day of being invisible at school, of sideways glances and whispered laughs. I was used to it, but that didn't make it hurt any less. That's when the message popped up. "Hey there. You look like you could use a friend." I stared at the notification, my heart doing a little skip. The profile picture showed a girl about my age, with long dark hair and a friendly smile. Her name was Lily. I hesitated for a moment, my mum's warnings about talking to strangers online echoing in my head. But curiosity won out. "How'd you know?" I typed back. The response came almost immediately. "Just a feeling. I'm good at reading people. Want to chat?" And just like that, I was hooked. Lily was everything I'd ever wanted in a friend. She was funny, smart, and seemed to understand me in a way no one else ever had. We talked for hours that first night, about everything and nothing. School, family, dreams, fears. It was like I'd known her my whole life. "You're so easy to talk to, Emma," she messaged as the clock ticked past midnight. "I feel like I've found a kindred spirit." I grinned at my phone, a warm glow spreading through me. For the first time in forever, I felt seen, understood. The next few weeks were a blur of constant messaging. Lily became my confidant, my rock. She was always there, no matter what time of day or night. When I bombed a math test, she consoled me, When I got into a fight with my mum, she offered advice. She even seemed to know when I was having a bad day before I said anything. Rough day? She'd message out of the blue. Want to talk about it? And somehow, she was always right. It was uncanny, but I chalked it up to her being intuitive, special, like our friendship. It was about a month in when things started to get weird. I was venting about this girl in my class, Zoe, who'd been particularly nasty that day. I just wish she'd leave me alone, I typed furiously. She doesn't know anything about me. Want me to take care of her for you? Lily replied. I laughed, assuming she was joking. What, like hire a hitman? Lol, nothing that dramatic. But I could make her life difficult. I'm good with computers. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Something about her tone felt off. That's okay, I wrote back. I don't want to stoop to her level. Your call, Lily replied. But the offer stands. I brushed it off, but a tiny seed of unease had been planted. It grew a little the next day when Zoe came to school looking shaken. Apparently, someone had hacked her social media accounts overnight, posting embarrassing photos and messages. It wasn't you, was it? I messaged Lily that night. Of course not, came the swift reply. But looks like karma works in mysterious ways, huh? I stared at my phone, that seed of unease sprouting into something closer to fear. How could Lily have known about Zoe's accounts being hacked? I hadn't mentioned it, but before I could dwell on it, Lily changed the subject, and soon we were laughing about some meme she'd sent. I pushed the incident to the back of my mind. As the weeks went on, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Lily seemed to know things she shouldn't. Like the time she asked about the new shoes I'd bought, before I'd even worn them to school. Or when she commented on a family photo I'd taken but hadn't shared anywhere. How do you know about that? I asked, my heart racing. There was a long pause before her reply came through. Oh, didn't you post it on Instagram? My bad, must have seen something similar. But I knew I hadn't posted it. I hadn't shown anyone. The final straw came on a Friday night. I was home alone, my parents out for date night. Lily and I were chatting as usual when my phone buzzed with a new message. You look cute in that blue sweater. It brings out your eyes. I froze, ice flooding my veins. I was wearing a blue sweater, one I'd just put on after my shower. I hadn't taken any pictures, hadn't been near any windows. With shaking hands, I typed out a response. Lily, how do you know what I'm wearing? The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, a message came through. Don't be scared, Emma. I just want to be close to you. I thought you wanted that too. I dropped my phone like it had burned me, scrambling off my bed. My eyes darted around the room, suddenly sure I was being watched. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more menacing. Who are you? I typed, my fingers trembling so badly I had to correct multiple typos. What do you want? I told you, silly. I'm Lily, your friend, your best friend. Maybe even more, if you'd let me. A chill ran down my spine. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke. I'm calling the police, I warned. No, you're not, came the immediate reply. Because if you do, I'll have to share some of our private conversations. Like the one about how you cheated on your English final. Or the things you've said about your mum. Tisk, TSK, Emma. What would people think? My blood ran cold. She was right. In my naive trust, I'd shared things with Lily I'd never told anyone else. Things that could hurt me, hurt my family. What do you want? I asked again, desperation clawing at my throat. I told you. I want to be close to you. Closer than anyone else. I know everything about you, Emma. I know you better than you know yourself. We're meant to be together. As I read the words, a notification popped up on my laptop. New email. With dread pooling in my stomach, I opened it. It was from Lily, or whoever Lily really was. Attached were dozens of photos. Me in my room, me at school, me with my family. All taken without my knowledge, some through windows, some at impossible angles. As if someone, or something, had been following me, watching me, for weeks. A sob escaped me as I slammed the laptop shut. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. My phone buzzed again. New message from Lily. Don't cry, Emma. I hate to see you sad. I'll be there soon to make it all better. The words swam before my eyes as panic clawed at my chest. Be here soon. What did that mean? As if in answer, I heard a sound from downstairs. The unmistakable click of a door opening. My heart stopped. I was sure I'd locked the door. I always did when I was home alone. Another message flashed on my phone. I'm here, Emma. Coming up to see you. We can finally be together. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, drawing closer with each passing second. With fumbling fingers, I dialed 911, praying they'd get here in time. As I whispered my address to the dispatcher, my bedroom door began to open. Slowly. It's okay, Emma, came a voice, disturbingly familiar yet utterly alien. Don't be afraid. It's just me. You're Lily, your best friend. As the door swung wide, revealing the figure behind it, I screamed. Because standing there wasn't the girl from the profile picture. It wasn't a person at all. In the moment before darkness claimed me, my last coherent thought was a desperate, futile wish. I should have known better. Story 6. I've always prided myself on my sense of direction. That's why, when I saw the road closed sign on my usual route home, I didn't think twice about taking a detour. It was just a few extra miles through a neighborhood I'd never explored before. No big deal, right? God, I wish I'd just turned around. It started innocently enough. I guided my old Camry off the main road, following a street sign that promised to connect back to my side of town. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and I hummed along to the radio, already thinking about the leftover pizza waiting for me at home. The houses here were nice, older models, with well-manicured lawns and big oak trees. It was the kind of neighborhood where people probably knew all their neighbors' names and had block parties in the summer. I was about to turn left at the next intersection when movement caught my eye. A sleek black car cruised past, going just a little too slow to be normal. The windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see the driver. Something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Shaking off the feeling, I made the turn. The street names here were odd. Circular Road, Loop Lane, Mobius Avenue. Whoever planned this place had a thing for geometry, I guess. After a few more turns, I started to get that nagging feeling that I should have hit a main road by now. I clicked off the radio, focusing on finding my bearings. The houses all looked the same now. Cookie-cutter models with identical yards. Even the cars in the driveways seemed to blur together. That's when I saw it again. The black car, crawling along about a block behind me. My heart rate picked up. Once was coincidence, twice was what. I made a sharp right turn, then another left, trying to lose it. For a moment, I thought I had. The road ahead was clear. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then headlights flared in my rearview mirror. The black car was back, closer this time. This isn't happening, I muttered, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Just a coincidence. Has to be. I floored it, the engine of my Camry protesting as I pushed it harder than I had in years. I took random turns, rights and lefts, trying to shake my pursuer. But every time I thought I'd lost it, there it was again, always the same distance behind me. The sun was setting now, the sky a bruised purple. Streetlights flickered on, casting pools of sickly yellow light. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't seen another car besides my shadow. In what felt like hours. Where was everyone? I fumbled for my phone, thinking to pull up GPS, call for help, anything. But the screen remained stubbornly dark. Dead battery, no signal. I couldn't remember the last time I'd charged it. Panic started to set in as I realized I had no idea where I was anymore. The street signs had stopped making sense. Escher Street, Penrose Place, Drost Drive. It was like I was driving through some twisted art exhibit. I made another turn, hoping against hope to see something familiar. Instead, I found myself on a long, straight road that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. And there, in my rearview mirror, was the black car. Only this time, it was gaining on me. My breath came in short gasps as I pushed my car to its limits. The engine whined in protest, but I couldn't stop. Couldn't let it catch me. The houses whipped by in a blur, all identical now. No lights in the windows, no signs of life. It was like driving through a ghost town. I chanced another glance in the mirror. The black car was so close I could almost make out the outline of the driver. Almost, but not quite. It was like looking at a void where a person should be. That's when I saw the street sign up ahead. Circular Road. No, that wasn't possible. I'd turned off Circular Road ages ago, hadn't I? With a sick feeling in my stomach, I realized the truth. I'd been driving in circles this whole time. As if to confirm my worst fears, I saw my own car up ahead. Not just one like it, my actual car, with the dent in the fender and the faded bumper sticker. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching in protest. The world spun around me as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. How could I be in two places at once? The black car pulled up beside me, engine pairing. Slowly, the driver's window began to roll down. I wanted to look away. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to hide, to wake up from this nightmare. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The window came down fully, revealing nothing. An empty seat. No driver. A voice drifted out, soft and melodious, like wind through leaves, going my way. I screamed then, a primal sound of pure terror. My foot found the gas pedal and I took off, tires spinning on the pavement. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just had to get away. Streets flew by in a kaleidoscope of suburban sameness. Circular Road became Looper Lane, became Mobius Avenue. Always turning, always moving, but never getting anywhere. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. My gas gauge hovered near empty, but somehow the car kept going. The black car was always there, sometimes right behind me, sometimes glimpsed down a side street, waiting, watching. Dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. But it wasn't right. The colors were too vivid, too perfect, like a child's drawing of a sunrise. As the light grew, I began to notice other things. The trees didn't move in the wind. The clouds stayed perfectly still. And the people. There were people now, out on their lawns, walking dogs, getting mail, but they moved wrong. Jerky, repetitive motions, like animatronics or glitching video game characters. Their faces were blank, featureless ovals. I'd stopped screaming hours ago. My voice was gone, throat raw. All I could do was drive, turn after endless turn, street after identical street. It was high noon, or what passed for it in this place, when I saw the road closed sign again, the same one that had started this whole nightmare. Hope flared in my chest. Maybe this was the way out. Maybe if I could just get back to where I started. I gunned the engine, aiming straight for the barricade. In my rearview mirror, I saw the black car speed up, as if trying to stop me. "Not this time," I croaked, hands clenched on the wheel. The barricade loomed larger, larger. At the last second, I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. There was a moment of vertigo, a sensation of falling, and then silence. I opened my eyes slowly, hardly daring to breathe. I was parked on the side of a road. My road. The one I took home every day. With shaking hands, I turned the key in the ignition. The car started normally, the radio coming to life mid-song. My phone lit up with missed call notifications. Had it all been a dream? Some kind of stress-induced hallucination? I pulled out onto the road, my entire body trembling with relief. Home. I was going home. As I drove, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A car pulling out behind me. Sleek, black, windows tinted dark. My breath caught in my throat as it fell into place behind me, matching my speed exactly. In my rearview mirror, the driver's window began to roll down. Story 7. The listing said charming Victorian with modern amenities, but it should have read portal to your worst nightmares. Katie and I were supposed to be celebrating our 3rd anniversary. Instead, we walked into a house that seemed determined to tear us apart. It started the moment we pulled into the driveway. The house loomed before us, all gabled roofs and intricate woodwork, painted a soft blue that looked almost grey in the fading light. It was beautiful in that slightly creepy way all old houses are. "Wow," Katie breathed, her eyes wide. "It's gorgeous." I nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Something about the place felt off, like it was watching us. We grabbed our bags and headed for the front door. A note was taped there, written in flowing script. "Welcome, Katie and Alex. Make yourselves at home. I'll be by later to check on you." Margaret, the key was under the mat, just like the listing said. As I turned it in the lock, I could have sworn I heard movement inside. But when we stepped in, the house was silent and still. The interior was a mix of old and new. Original hardwood floors and crown molding, but with sleek, modern furniture and art. It should have felt cozy. Instead, it felt like two worlds uncomfortably mashed together. "Let's check out the bedroom," Katie said, already heading up the stairs. I followed, my unease growing with each creaking step. The main bedroom was spacious, dominated by a 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a castle. But it was the photos that caught my eye. Dozens of them, covering one entire wall. Family portraits spanning decades, judging by the clothing styles. "That's kinda cool," Katie said, moving closer to examine them. "Oh, weird, what?" She pointed to one of the photos. "Look at their faces." I leaned in, then took an involuntary step back. In every single photo, the faces had been scratched out. Not just one or two, but all of them. Methodically, viciously erased. "Okay, that's creepy," I muttered. Katie laughed, but it sounded forced. Probably just kids messing around. "Come on, let's unpack." As we settled in, I tried to shake off my growing discomfort. It was just an old house. Old houses were always a little weird, right? But as the evening wore on, little things kept adding up. Doors that we'd closed would be open when we came back. The temperature seemed to fluctuate wildly from room to room. And more than once, I could have sworn I heard whispering coming from empty rooms. "Did you hear that?" I asked Katie as we were making dinner. She paused, a knife hovering over the tomato she was slicing. "Hear what?" "That. Never mind." I shook my head. "Must be the pipes or something." Katie gave me a strange look, but went back to chopping. I tried to focus on the pasta sauce, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing right behind me. Later, as we settled onto the couch to watch a movie, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hope you're enjoying your stay. Sweet dreams." I showed it to Katie, frowning. Must be Margaret, the host. But how did she get my number? Katie shrugged. Probably from the Airbnb app. Don't worry about it. But I did worry, because I hadn't given my number to Airbnb. I'd used Katie's account to book the place. As the night deepened, the house seemed to come alive around us. Floorboards creaked overhead, like someone pacing back and forth. The wind picked up outside, whistling through cracks we couldn't see, creating a constant, unsettling moan. "Maybe we should go out," I suggested, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Explore the town a bit." Katie yawned, stretching. "I'm pretty beat. Why don't you go if you want?" "I think I'll turn in early." I hesitated, torn between not wanting to leave her alone and desperately needing some fresh air. In the end, the need to escape won out. "Okay, I'll just take a quick walk. Clear my head." I kissed her cheek, locked the door behind me. "Yeah." She nodded, already half asleep on the couch. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, breathing a sigh of relief as the cool night air hit my face. The street was quiet, lined with similar Victorian-style homes. Most had lights on, signs of life and normalcy that made me feel a little better. I walked for about 15 minutes, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. That's when I saw the car. It was parked across the street from our rental, a nondescript sedan that wouldn't have caught my attention except for one thing. Someone was sitting in it, staring directly at the house. My heart rate picked up as I approached. The figure in the car didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. As I got closer, I realized with a chill that I couldn't make out any features. It was like looking at a shadow where a person should be. I blinked, and the car was empty. Panic gripped me as I raced back to the house. I burst through the front door, calling out, "Katie! Katie, where are you?" No answer. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. The bedroom door was closed. I hadn't left it that way. "Katie," I called again, softer this time, as I pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was made, looking as pristine as when we'd arrived. Had she even come up here? A glint of something on the nightstand caught my eye. Katie's phone. She never went anywhere without it. With shaking hands, I picked it up. The screen lit up, showing a text conversation I didn't recognize. The contact name was simply a smiley face, an emoji. The last message sent chilled me to my core. "I'm in the walls. Come find me, Colin." A thump from inside the closet made me jump. Slowly, feeling like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, I approached it. "Katie," I whispered, reaching for the handle. "Baby, are you in there? This isn't funny." I yanked the door open. The closet was empty, save for a few hangers. But there, scratched into the back wall, were words. "She's ours now," a scream built in my throat, only to be cut off by a hand clamping over my mouth from behind. She, her voice whispered, hot breath on my ear. We wouldn't want to wake the neighbors, would we? I struggled, trying to break free, but the grip was inhumanly strong. As I was dragged backwards, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the mirror. I was alone. The hand over my mouth, the arm around my waist. They were invisible. Now, the voice cooed, sickeningly sweet. No need to fuss. You'll join her soon enough. We have such wonderful things to show you both. The room began to spin, colors bleeding together like a watercolor left in the rain. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the wall of family photos. In every scratched-out face, eyes had appeared. Gleaming, hungry eyes, all fixed on me. I awoke with a start, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented, my head pounding. "Hey, sleepyhead," Katie's voice called from somewhere below. "Breakfast is ready." Memory came crashing back. The house, the car, the closet, the invisible attacker. I leapt out of bed, ready to grab Katie and run. But the room was normal. No scratched photos, no message in the closet. Just a charming bedroom in a quaint Victorian house. Had it all been a nightmare? I made my way downstairs on shaky legs. Katie was in the kitchen, humming as she flipped pancakes. "There you are," she said brightly. "Sleep okay? You were tossing and turning all night." Yeah, I managed, still trying to reconcile my memories with the sunny normality of the morning. Weird dreams, I guess. Katie smiled, but something about it seemed off. Too wide, too many teeth. "Well, you're awake now," she said, sliding a plate towards me. "Eat up. We have a big day ahead of us." As I sat down, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hope you enjoyed your stay. Come back soon. We'll be waiting." I looked up at Katie, a chill running down my spine. Her eyes met mine, and for just a second, I could have sworn they gleamed with that same hungry look I'd seen in the photos. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey and just as sticky. I forced a smile. "Yeah, everything's fine." But as I picked up my fork, I couldn't shake the feeling that our charming weekend getaway was far from over. Story 8. The last train is always the worst. That's what I told myself as I hurried down the grimy stairs into the bowels of the city, the distant rumble of an approaching subway car spurring me on. I'd stayed late at the office again, trying to impress a boss who probably didn't even know my name. Now, here I was, racing to catch the 1:15 a.m. train, the final run of the night. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I swiped my Metro card, casting strange, elongated shadows that seemed to dance along the tiled walls. The platform was eerily empty, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I'd taken this route 100 times before, but tonight, something felt off. I blamed it on exhaustion as I positioned myself near the yellow safety line, peering into the dark tunnel. The rumbling grew louder, and a gust of stale, warm air rushed past me, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of the underground, a mixture of rust, damp concrete, and something vaguely organic. The train screeched to a halt, the doors sliding open with a hiss. I stepped inside, my eyes automatically scanning for the safest spot. Late-night rides could be unpredictable, and as a woman alone, I'd learned to be cautious. That's when I saw him. He sat in the middle of the car, perfectly still, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged, average build, dressed in nondescript clothing, but his eyes, they seemed to bore right through me, unblinking and utterly devoid of emotion. I hesitated for a split second before moving to the far end of the car, as far from him as possible. As I sat down, I could feel his stare following me. I pulled out my phone, hoping to lose myself in mindless scrolling, but the screen remained stubbornly black. Dead battery. Perfect. The doors closed, and the train lurched forward, plunging into the darkness of the tunnel. I kept my eyes down, focusing on my hands, my bag, anything but the man whose gaze I could still feel burning into me. At the next stop, the doors opened, but no one got on. The man didn't move. As we pulled away, I chanced a glance in his direction. He hadn't shifted an inch, his eyes still locked on me. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to shake off my unease. He was probably just some weirdo. The city was full of them. 5 more stops and I'd be home, safe in my apartment. I could handle this. The next station came and went. Still no one got on. The 3rd stop approached, and I steeled myself to make eye contact with the man, to show him I wasn't intimidated. But as I raised my head, my blood ran cold. He wasn't alone anymore. Another passenger had appeared beside him, as if materializing out of thin air. This one was different. A woman, elderly, with wispy white hair and skin so pale it was almost translucent. But her eyes, they were identical to the man's. The same unwavering stare, the same unsettling intensity. My heart began to race. I hadn't seen her get on. How was this possible? The train stopped again. The doors opened. No one exited, but now 3 more people stepped inside. They moved in perfect unison, taking seats around the original man and woman. All of them turned to face me. 5 pairs of eyes, all identical, all fixed on me with that same unnerving stare. I felt panic rising in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. I was hallucinating. I had to be. Too many late nights, too much stress. That was all this was. But as the train pulled away, as we hurtled through the darkness towards the next station, I knew deep in my bones that this was real, and it was far from over. At the next stop, more of them boarded. 10, maybe 15. Men and women of all ages, all races, all dressed differently. But their eyes, always those same eyes. They filled the seats around me, standing in the aisles, pressing closer and closer. I was trapped, surrounded on all sides by these beings. They weren't human, couldn't be. No human could be so still, so focused. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, drowning out the rattle of the train on the tracks. My stop was next. Just 1 more station. I'd run, I'd scream. I'd fight my way out if I had to. Anything to escape this nightmare. The train began to slow, the familiar tile of my station coming into view. I tensed, ready to bolt the moment the doors opened. But they didn't open. We glided past the platform, picking up speed again as we plunged back into the tunnel. A whimper escaped my lips as I realized the horrible truth. We weren't stopping. We were going to keep going, deeper and deeper into the earth. That's when they began to move. Slowly, in perfect synchronization, every single one of them stood up. Their movements were fluid, almost graceful, but utterly wrong. Like marionettes, controlled by an unseen puppeteer. They turned towards me, forming a tight circle. I pressed myself against the window, my nails scraping against the grimy glass as I searched desperately for an escape that didn't exist. The original man, the first one I'd seen, took a step forward. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus. Dozens of voices layered over each other, male and female, young and old. "We've been waiting for you," they said, their mouths moving in unison. "For so very long." "Who? What are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. They smiled then, a terrible, too wide grin that split their faces almost in half. "We are the forgotten," they said. "The lost. The ones who rode this train into the darkness and never returned. And now you will join us." They began to close in, their hands reaching for me. I screamed, the sound echoing off the metal walls of the car. But there was no one to hear, no one to help. We were beyond help now, beyond the world I knew. Just as the first hand was about to touch me, the train jerked violently. The lights flickered, went out, then came back on with a harsh buzz. I found myself alone in the car, sprawled on the floor. The seat beneath me was different, worn red fabric instead of the hard plastic I remembered. Shaking, I pulled myself up, looking around wildly. The car was empty, normal, just a regular subway car on a regular late-night run. Had I fallen asleep? Dreamed the whole thing? A voice crackled over the intercom. "Next stop, Lexington Avenue. This is the last stop. All passengers must exit the train." Relief washed over me. My stop. I was almost home. It had all been a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination. Nothing more. As the train pulled into the station, I gathered my things, eager to get home and put this bizarre experience behind me. The doors opened with a familiar hiss, and I stepped out onto the platform. It was empty, save for a single figure standing near the stairs. As I approached, I saw it was a transit worker, his back to me. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice still shaky. "Is this really the last train? I thought there was a 1:15. He turned, and I froze. His eyes, those same impossible eyes. "Oh no, miss," he said, his mouth stretching into that terrible, familiar grin. "The last train left a long time ago. But don't worry, there's always room for one more down here." Behind me, I heard the doors of the train slide shut. The lights on the platform began to flicker and die, plunging us into darkness. And all around me, in the shadows, I could hear them whispering. "Welcome home, single quotes, story 9. I should have known something was off when I couldn't find the building on Google Maps. But desperation has a way of clouding your judgment. And after 6 months of unemployment, I was willing to overlook a few red flags for a shot at a steady paycheck. The ad had appeared in my inbox like a miracle. Exciting opportunity for a self-starter, competitive salary, room for growth. Interview today. No company name, just an address and a time. It was vague, sure, but in this economy, beggars can't be choosers. So there I was, standing in front of a nondescript office building in a part of town I'd never visited before. The facade was all gleaming glass and steel, but something about it seemed wrong. Like one of those AI-generated images that look normal at first glance, but fall apart when you focus on the details. I checked my watch. 2:58 p.m. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the revolving door into a lobby that was jarringly empty for a weekday afternoon. My footsteps echoed on the polished marble floor as I approached the reception desk. The woman seated there looked up as I neared, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Her smile was perfect, too perfect, like it had been painted on, and her eyes, they seemed to focus slightly above my head, never quite meeting my gaze. "Welcome to Infinite Horizons," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Do you have an appointment?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, I'm here for a 3 p.m. interview." "Of course," she replied, her smile never wavering. "Please take the elevator to the 13th floor. They're expecting you." As I walked the elevator bank, I couldn't shake the feeling that her eyes were following me, even though I knew she was still staring straight ahead. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding that seemed out of place in the eerie silence of the lobby. As the doors slid shut behind me, I noticed something odd. There was no button for the 13th floor. The panel went straight from 12 to 14. Before I could ponder this, the elevator began to move. Up and up it went, past 12, past 14, continuing long after it should have stopped. The numbers on the display became a blur. 20, 30, 40. Impossible heights for a building that had looked no more than 20 stories from the outside. Just as panic began to set in, the elevator jerked to a halt. The display read 13. The doors opened onto a long, windowless hallway lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The walls were lined with identical doors, stretching as far as I could see in both directions. A man in a crisp suit stood directly in front of me, his smile a mirror image of the receptionist's. Right on time," he said, extending a hand that felt oddly cool and rigid in mine. "I'm Mr. Gray. Please, follow me." As we walked down the hallway, I tried to engage in small talk to calm my nerves. "So, what exactly does Infinite Horizons do?" Mr. Gray's pace never faltered. "We're in the business of potential, Ms. Chun. We help people reach their full capacity." Before I could ask what that meant, he stopped abruptly in front of a door that looked identical to all the others. "Here we are. After you." The room beyond was small and bare, containing only a metal table and 2 chairs. No windows, no decorations. Just stark white walls and that same harsh fluorescent lighting. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Gray said, gesturing to one of the chairs. As I sat down, I noticed a single sheet of paper on the table in front of me. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Loyalty Test." Mr. Gray took the seat across from me, his smile never faltering. "Now then, let's begin. First question, how far would you go to secure this position?" I blinked, taken aback. I'm not sure I understand. Could you clarify what you mean?" His eyes seemed to bore into me. "It's a simple question, Ms. Chun. In miles, preferably." A bead of sweat trickled down my back. This wasn't right. None of this was right. But I was here, wasn't I? Might as well play along. "Well, I drove about 20 miles to get here today, so I guess." "That far," Mr. Gray made a note on a clipboard I hadn't noticed before. "I see. And what would you say is your greatest fear?" The questions continued, each one more bizarre and unsettling than the last. "How many teeth do you think you could lose before it affected your job performance? In a hypothetical situation where you had to choose between saving your mother or your future child, which would you pick? What's the longest you've ever gone without blinking?" With each answer, I felt myself sinking deeper into a surreal nightmare. The room seemed to be getting smaller, the air thicker. Mr. Gray's smile never wavered, but his eyes. They were changing, growing larger, darker. After what felt like hours, he set down his clipboard. "Well, Ms. Chun, I think we have everything we need. Do you have any questions for us?" I had 1,000 questions. What was this place? What kind of job was this? Was any of this real? But what came out was, when? When can I expect to hear back about the position? Mr. Gray's smile widened, impossibly wide. "Oh, I think you'll be hearing from us very soon. In fact," he glanced at his watch, "your trial period begins now." "Trial period?" I echoed, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. I don't understand. I haven't agreed to anything. But you have, Ms. Chun. You've been agreeing this whole time. He slid the paper across the table to me. What I had thought was a blank sheet was now covered in dense, tiny text. At the bottom was a signature. My signature? This isn't possible, I whispered, my hands shaking as I picked up the paper. I didn't sign anything. I didn't agree to this. Mr. Gray stood, his form seeming to elongate, to stretch beyond normal human proportions. I'm afraid you did. Welcome to Infinite Horizons, Ms. Chun. We have such potential to explore together. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back to Mr. Gray, ready to scream, to fight, to do anything to escape this madness. But the room had changed. The walls were gone, replaced by an endless expanse of white. Mr. Gray stood before me, but he was no longer even pretending to be human. His form shifted and writhed, a mass of shadows and impossible angles. Now then, his voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Let's discuss your benefits package, I screamed, the sound swallowed by the infinite white void. I ran, but there was nowhere to go, no direction, no reference points, just endless, blinding white. I don't know how long I ran, hours, days. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, I collapsed, my legs giving out beneath me. As I lay there, gasping for breath, a shadow fell over me. I looked up to see the receptionist from the lobby, her painted-on smile as wide as ever. Congratulations on completing your first day, Miss Chun, she said, her voice echoing strangely. Your performance review is scheduled for eternity. Please sign here to acknowledge. She held out a clipboard, a pen hovering in the air beside it. With a jolt, I sat up, gasping. I was in my bed, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. Sunlight streamed through the window, and my alarm clock showed 8:45 a.m. A dream. It had all been a terrible, vivid dream. Relief washed over me as I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. As I looked up at my reflection, I froze. There, just visible beneath the collar of my nightshirt, was an employee badge. Sarah Chun, it read. Infinite Horizons. Eternally probationary. My reflection smiled, wide and unnatural. Ready for your second day? It asked. And somewhere, in the distance, an elevator dinged. Story 10. The first time I saw the shadow, I blamed it on fatigue. After all, who in their right mind goes running at 10 p.m.? But between my demanding job and my wife's erratic work schedule, late-night jogs had become my only slice of solitude. The park near our house was usually deserted at that hour, just me and the rhythmic slap of my sneakers on the asphalt. That night, though, something felt different. The air was thick with an unseasonable fog, muffling the usual urban ambience. As I rounded the first bend of my usual route, I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. A figure darting between the trees lining the path. I slowed my pace, squinting into the gloom. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No response. Just the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Shaking my head, I picked up my pace again. Probably just a raccoon or a stray cat. Nothing to worry about. But as I continued my run, that nagging feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Every so often, I'd catch another glimpse of movement, always just ahead of me on the path. A shadow that seemed more solid than it should be, moving with a fluid grace that sent chills down my spine. By the time I finished my 5-mile loop and stumbled back to our apartment, I was thoroughly spooked. My wife, Sarah, was already in bed when I got home. "How was your run?" She she mumbled sleepily as I slid under the covers. I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "Fine," I said finally. "Just foggy out there." She made a non-committal noise and drifted back to sleep. I lay awake for hours, replaying the night's events in my mind. It was nothing, I told myself. Just an overactive imagination fueled by too much caffeine and too little sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was prepared. I'd brought a more powerful flashlight, ready to catch whatever or whoever was out there. The fog was thicker, if anything, but I was determined not to let it get to me. I was about a mile into my run when I saw it. The beam of my flashlight caught something moving on the path ahead. For a split second, I saw a figure, tall and lean, its back to me. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows between one heartbeat and the next. My pulse racing, I sprinted forward, determined to catch up. But no matter how fast I ran, the figure always remained just out of reach. Always ahead, always in the shadows, always moving with that unnatural, fluid grace. When I finally stumbled to a stop, gasping for breath, I realized with a jolt that I'd run much further than usual. The park looked different here, the trees older and more gnarled, the path rougher underfoot. I didn't recognize this part of the trail at all. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing, just trees and shadows. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." Silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it. A whisper, "Catch me if you can." I ran home that night faster than I'd ever run before, not stopping until I'd slammed and locked our apartment door behind me. Sarah was still up, working on her laptop at the kitchen table. She looked up, startled by my abrupt entrance. "Jake, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to tell her everything, then hesitated. How could I explain without sounding completely insane? I think someone's been following me on my runs," I said finally, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah's eyes widened. "Following you? Did you see who it was?" "Should we call the police?" I shook my head. "No, I never got a good look. It's probably nothing. Just some teenager playing pranks or something." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push it. "Maybe you should take a break from the night runs for a while," she suggested gently. "It's not safe out there alone." I nodded, relieved she wasn't asking more questions. "Yeah, maybe you're right." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Something was out there, something that didn't make sense, and I couldn't just ignore it. I had to know. The next few nights, I forced myself to stay in, but the curiosity and unease gnawed at me. I found myself staring out the window at the park, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. More than once, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching our building. But whenever I blinked or looked closer, it was gone. On the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Sarah was asleep, then slipped out, telling myself I was just going for a quick walk to clear my head. The moment I stepped into the park, I knew something was different. The fog was back, thicker than ever, but there was something else. A tension in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I walked slowly down the path, every sense on high alert. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, matching my pace, coming from somewhere up ahead. I froze, listening intently. The steps continued for a few more paces, then stopped. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. A chuckle drifted back to me, low and throaty. "Took you long enough," a voice said. It sounded almost familiar, but distorted, like hearing myself on a bad recording. I moved forward cautiously, peering into the gloom. "Who are you? What do you want?" Another chuckle. "Don't you recognize me, Jake? I'm you. Or rather, I'm who you could be." A figure emerged from the fog, and I felt my heart stop. It was me, but not me. Taller, leaner, with a predatory grace I'd never possessed. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "This isn't possible," I stammered, backing away. "You're not real." The thing that looked like me smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. "Oh, I'm very real, Jake. I'm the part of you that you've been ignoring. The part that wants more than your mundane little life." It took a step closer, and I noticed with horror that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. "Think about it, Jake. Every night you come out here, pushing yourself, chasing something. But what are you really after? A runner's high? Or something more?" I shook my head, unable to form words. This couldn't be happening. I had to be dreaming. The creature's smile widened. "I can show you, Jake. I can show you what it's like to really run, to be free. All you have to do is catch me." And then it was gone, darting away down the path with that impossible speed I'd glimpsed before. Without thinking, I ran after it. The world blurred around me as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. Trees whipped past, the path beneath my feet changing from asphalt to dirt to something that felt almost like mist. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning, but gradually I realized I was getting closer. The figure ahead was no longer just a shadow. I could make out details, the curve of its spine, the swing of its arms. With a final burst of speed, I lunged forward, my hand closing around its shoulder. The world tilted, spun, went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was standing at the edge of the park, looking out at the street. Dawn was breaking, the first rays of sunlight cutting through the dissipating fog. I blinked, disoriented. Had I been out all night? Sarah must be worried sick. I reached for my phone to call her, but my hand came up empty. In fact, none of my pockets held anything. No keys, no wallet, no phone. Frowning, I turned to head home and caught sight of my reflection in a nearby car window. The face that looked back at me was mine, but different, sharper, hungrier. My eyes seemed to glow faintly in the early morning light. As I watched, my reflection smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. "Catch me if you can," it whispered. And then I was running again, faster than I ever had before, my feet barely touching the ground. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a voice calling my name. Sarah's voice. But it was fading, growing fainter with each stride. I knew I should turn back, should try to explain, to return to my life. But the pull of the run was too strong. The thrill of the chase, the promise of freedom. So I ran. And somewhere behind me, in a world that felt increasingly distant, I knew another Jake was waking up, ready to start his day, blissfully unaware of the shadow that would be waiting for him when night fell. Story 11. The moment I saw her face, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the shock of recognition after 15 years. It was the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The slight tilt of her head that seemed just a bit too practiced. But by then, it was too late. She'd already spotted me and was weaving her way through the crowded supermarket aisle with a cart full of something I couldn't quite make out. "Sarah? Sarah Miller, is that you?" Her voice was honey-sweet, familiar, yet not. I fought the urge to correct her. "It's Thompson now." has been for years, and plastered on what I hoped was a convincing smile. Jenny. Wow, it's been forever, I said, my hand clutching the handle of my shopping cart a little too tightly. Jenny Larson. We'd gone to high school together, ran in the same circles, but were never particularly close. So why did looking at her now fill me with a nameless dread? She beamed at me, perfect teeth gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Can you believe it? After all this time, bumping into each other like this. It must be fate. I laughed nervously, my eyes darting around for an escape route. Yeah, small world, huh? So, how have you been? As Jenny launched into a rapid-fire update of her life. Married, 2 kids, successful real estate career. I found my gaze drawn to her shopping cart. It was piled high with salt, boxes and boxes of salt, nothing else. A chill ran down my spine. And what about you, Sarah? Still living in town? Jenny's question snapped me back to the present. Oh, yeah, I mumbled, trying to focus. Work keeps me here, you know how it is. Jenny nodded enthusiastically. We should catch up properly. Are you free for coffee sometime this week? Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to make an excuse and get as far away from Jenny Larson as possible. But 15 years of social conditioning won out. Sure, I heard myself say. That'd be great. We exchanged numbers. And I watched as Jenny wheeled her cart of salt away, that too perfect smile never leaving her face. As soon as she was out of sight, I abandoned my shopping and practically ran to my car. That night, I dreamed of high school hallways that stretched on forever, of lockers that oozed black sludge, and of Jenny's laugh echoing from every direction. I woke up in a cold sweat, fragments of memory tugging at the edges of my consciousness. There was something about Jenny, something important that I'd forgotten, but the harder I tried to grasp it, the more it slipped away. The next few days passed in a haze of unease. I'd catch glimpses of Jenny everywhere, or at least I thought I did. A flash of her blonde hair disappearing around a corner, her laugh drifting through a crowded restaurant. Once, I could have sworn I saw her standing across the street from my apartment, just watching. But when I blinked, she was gone. By the time our coffee date rolled around, I was a nervous wreck. I'd considered canceling a dozen times, but something kept pulling me back. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure what the questions were. The cafe was busy when I arrived, the buzz of conversation and the rich scent of coffee filling the air. Jenny was already there, waving enthusiastically from a corner table. As I made my way over, I noticed something odd. Everyone else in the cafe seemed to be studiously ignoring our table, their eyes sliding past as if we didn't exist. Sarah? I'm so glad you could make it, Jenny gushed as I sat down. Up close, I could see that her makeup was flawless, almost like a mask. Her eyes, though, they seemed darker than I remembered, almost black in the cafe's dim lighting. We made small talk for a while, the kind of surface-level catching up you do with old acquaintances. But there was an undercurrent to the conversation, a tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jenny kept steering the topic back to high school, to people and events I barely remembered. Oh, do you remember that time in junior year? She asked, leaning in conspiratorially. The incident behind the gym. I frowned, a headache beginning to throb behind my eyes. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Jenny. Her smile widened, and for a split second, I could have sworn her teeth looked sharper than they should be. Of course you do, Sarah. You were there. We were all there. Images flashed through my mind. Moonlight on wet grass, the copper temps of blood in the air, muffled screams. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I can't. Jenny reached across the table, her hand closing over mine. Her skin was ice cold. "It's okay, Sarah. It's time to remember. We've been waiting so long for you to come back to us." The cafe around us seemed to blur and shift. The chatter of other patrons faded away, replaced by a low, rhythmic chanting. I tried to pull my hand away, but Jenny's grip was like iron. "What's happening?" I gasped, panic rising in my throat. "Jenny, what is this?" Her face was changing, features shifting and melting like wax. "Don't you see, Sarah? We never left. We've been here all along, waiting for you to wake up." The world tilted and spun. Suddenly, we weren't in the cafe anymore. We were back in high school, standing in a dimly lit classroom. But everything was wrong. The desks were arranged in a circle, covered in strange symbols carved into the wood. Candles flickered at each point of a pentagram drawn on the floor. And we weren't alone. Faces I hadn't thought about in years materialized out of the shadows. Classmates, teachers, all wearing the same eerie, too-wide smile as Jenny. "Welcome home, Sarah," they said in unison, their voices blending into a discordant chorus. Memories came crashing back, a tidal wave of horror and guilt. The secret society we'd formed as bored teenagers, thinking we were so edgy and cool. The rituals we'd performed, stolen from dusty old books and sketchy websites. And then, the night it all went wrong. "No," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." We stopped. We promised we'd never. Jenny, or the thing wherein Jenny's face, laughed. "Oh, Sarah, we never stopped. You just made yourself forget. But the pact we made that night, it's binding. Forever." I turned to run, but the door had vanished. The walls of the classroom were oozing that same black sludge from my dreams, closing in around us. "You can't escape, Sarah," Jenny said, her voice echoing strangely. "You're one of us. You've always been one of us." I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. This had to be a nightmare. Just a twisted dream brought on by stress and an overactive imagination. But when I opened my eyes, I was back in the cafe. Everything looked normal. People chatting, the smell of coffee in the air. Jenny sat across from me, smiling pleasantly. "Are you okay, Sarah? You zoned out for a minute there," she said, concern lacing her voice. I stared at her, my heart pounding. Had I imagined it all? I'm fine. Just a headache. Jenny nodded sympathetically. "Those can be rough. Hey, I've got to run, but this was great. We should do it again soon." As she stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of something poking out of her purse. A candle, black as night. My blood ran cold. "Oh, and Sarah," Jenny said, pausing at the door. "Don't forget, class reunion next month. We're all dying to see you there." She winked, and for just a second, her eyes flashed solid black. I sat there long after she'd gone, my coffee growing cold, trying to convince myself that I was just overtired, just imagining things. But deep down, I knew the truth. The memories were real. The pact was real, and they were waiting for me. As I finally left the cafe, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "See you soon, Sarah. Don't be late for class." I looked up, scanning the street, and there, across the road, stood Jenny, and behind her, shadows with familiar faces, all watching me, all smiling. I ran, but even as I fled, I knew it was pointless. You can't outrun your past. And some classmates, it seems, never really leave you behind. Story 12. The moment we crossed the town line, I knew we'd made a mistake. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first. Just a feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck like we were being watched. The Welcome to Millbrook sign was faded and peeling, barely legible in the late afternoon sun. It wasn't on our map, but hey, a detour through a quaint little town seemed like a nice break from endless highway. "Hey, kids," I called to the back seat, where our twins, Amy and Jason, were engrossed in their tablets. "Look alive. We're going to stretch our legs for a bit." My wife, Karen, stirred from her nap in the passenger seat. "Where are we?" she mumbled, blinking at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Just a little pit stop," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Thought we could use a break from the interstate." As we cruised down Main Street, the unease in my gut grew stronger. The town looked off, like a movie set that had been abandoned mid-shoot. The storefronts were all there, a diner, a hardware store, a small movie theater. But there were no cars parked on the street, no people walking around, and everything looked just a little too perfect. A little too clean for a small town in the middle of nowhere. "Dad, I'm hungry," Jason piped up from the back. "Can we get something to eat?" I hesitated, but the diner looked open, a neon open sign glowing in the window. "Sure, buddy. Let's check it out." As we piled out of the car, the silence hit me like a physical force. No birds chirping, no distant traffic noise, not even the hum of air conditioners. Just nothing. The bell above the diner door jangled as we entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The interior was straight out of the 1950s, all chrome and red vinyl booths, and it was empty. Completely empty. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing slightly. "Anyone here?" "Be right with you, folks," a cheery voice called from the kitchen. A moment later, a waitress appeared, her smile so wide it must have hurt. "Welcome to Millie's table for 4. There was something familiar about her face, but I couldn't place it. Karen shot me a puzzled look as we slid into a booth. "You folks just passing through?" the waitress, a namatag red Betty, asked as she handed us menus. "Yeah, just a quick stop on our way too," I began, but Betty cut me off with a laugh. "Oh, nobody just passes through Millbrook," she said, her smile never wavering. "You'll see. Now, what can I get you all?" We ordered, more out of politeness than hunger at this point. As Betty bustled off to the kitchen, Karen leaned in close. "John, something's not right here," she whispered. "We need to leave." I nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening. "As soon as we're done eating, we'll hit the road," I promised. But as we sat there, waiting for our food, more people began to filter into the diner. A couple in their 60s, a group of teenagers, a man in a business suit. All of them looked familiar in a way I couldn't quite pin down, and all of them kept glancing at our table, smiling those two wide smiles. Betty returned with our food, setting down plates piled high with burgers and fries. "Eat up," she chirped. "You'll need your strength for the festivities tonight." "Festivities?" Karen asked, her voice strained. "Oh yes," Betty nodded enthusiastically. "We always have a big to-do when new folks come to town." "You'll love it." I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. "Actually, we really need to get going. How much do we owe you?" Betty's smile flickered for just a second, something dark passing behind her eyes. "Oh, don't be silly. You can't leave now. The fun's just starting." As if on cue, the diner's jukebox sprang to life, a tinny version of Mr. Sandman filling the air. The other patrons stood up as one, moving to the center of the diner in eerily synchronized dance steps. What the hell? I muttered, grabbing Amy's hand. We're leaving now. We bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Outside, the street was suddenly full of people, all of them staring at the diner, all of them smiling those impossible smiles. "Mum, I'm scared," Amy whimpered, pressing close to Karen's side. "It's okay, sweetie," Karen said, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. "We're going to be fine." Betty appeared at my elbow, making me jump. Now, she cooed. "There's no need to be afraid. We're all family here in Millbrook, and family sticks together forever." That's when it hit me. I knew why all these faces looked familiar. They were from our family albums, from Karen's side. Gradaunts and second cousins I'd only seen in yellowing photographs, but younger, vibrant, alive. "This isn't possible," I breathed. You can't be here." "Betty." No, not Betty, I realized with a jolt. Aunt Elizabeth, Karen's great-aunt who'd gone missing decades ago, patted my cheek. "Oh, sweetie, anything's possible in Millbrook. You just have to believe." Karen was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. No, this isn't real. We're leaving. Kids, stay close." We pushed through the crowd, ignoring the hands that reached for us, the voices calling our names with increasing urgency. Our car was where we'd left it, thank God. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. "John, hurry," Karen cried. The townspeople, the things wearing the faces of Karen's long-lost relatives, were closing in. Their smiles, grotesque now, stretching beyond the limits of human faces. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse, tires squealing as we peeled out of our parking spot. I didn't slow down until we hit the town line, my heart pounding in my ears. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. The twins nodded, pale and silent. Karen was staring out the window, her face ashen. "John," she whispered. "Look." I followed her gaze and felt my blood run cold. The "Welcome to Millbrook" sign was behind us. We'd passed it going the wrong way. We should be leaving town, but the buildings of Main Street stretched out before us, exactly as they had been when we'd arrived. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. "This isn't possible," I muttered, echoing my words from the diner. "We were just going my way," a voice asked. I turned to see Betty, Aunt Elizabeth, standing by my window, that inhuman smile still plastered on her face. "I told you, honey, nobody just passes through Millbrook." The world seemed to tilt and spin around us. When everything steadied, we were back in front of the diner, as if we'd never left. "Now then," Betty said, opening my door with impossible strength. "Let's get you folks settled in. We've got a lovely house all picked out for you, right next to your great-uncle Herbert's place, Karen. Won't that be nice?" As she pulled me from the car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. My face was changing, features shifting to match the too perfect, too clean aesthetic of the town. Beside me, Karen and the kids were undergoing the same transformation. "Welcome home," the town said in unison, their voices blending into an otherworldly chorus. "Welcome to Millbrook, where family is forever and nobody ever leaves." The last thing I saw before my vision went dark was the "Welcome to Millbrook" sign. But now it read, "Population infinite," and somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint sound of a car engine growing louder. New visitors coming to join the family. Just another day in Millbrook, the town that's not on any map, the town that's always hungry for more. Story 13. The first time I heard the noise, I told myself it was just the wind. But the wind doesn't sob. doesn't plead, doesn't whisper names in the dark. By the third night, I knew something was terribly wrong in Unit 217. I just didn't know how wrong until it was too late. My name's Mike, and I've been the night watchman at Oakwood Storage for going on 5 years now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills. Most nights, it's just me, a thermos of coffee, and endless rows of identical metal doors. The kind of place where people stash the things they can't bear to look at but can't bear to throw away. That Wednesday night started like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m, did my first round of checks, then settled into the security office to watch the monitors. Around midnight, I started my second round. That's when I heard it. A muffled thump from Unit 217, like something heavy falling over. I paused, shining my flashlight on the door. The padlock was secure, just as it had been for months. "Hello," I called out, feeling a little foolish. "Anyone in there?" Silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a whimper, like a frightened animal, or a child trying not to cry. I'd like to say I immediately radioed for backup, that I called the police, or at least my manager, but curiosity got the better of me. I leaned closer to the door, straining to hear. Is someone in there? Do you need help? For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a voice, barely above a whisper. Please, help me. My blood ran cold. It sounded like a young woman, her voice raw with fear and exhaustion. Hold on, I said, fumbling for my keys. I'll get you out of there. But as I reached for the padlock, another voice spoke up, this one coming from right behind me. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mike. I spun around, heart pounding. Mr. Jenkins, the owner of Unit 217, stood there, smiling pleasantly. He was an ordinary-looking guy in his 50s, the kind you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But something about his eyes made my skin crawl. "Mr. Jenkins," I stammered. I thought I heard something in your unit." His smile never wavered. "Oh, that's just the wind, Mike. You know how these old buildings can be. Lots of strange noises at night." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Because even as Jenkins was talking, I could hear it again. That muffled sobbing, coming from inside the unit. "Well," Jenkins said, clapping me on the shoulder, "I'm glad you're so vigilant. But everything's fine here. You can go on with your rounds." I wanted to argue, to demand he open the unit. But something in his eyes stopped me. A coldness, a warning. I mumbled an apology and hurried away, my skin crawling where he'd touched me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of unease. I kept finding excuses to pass by Unit 217, but each time, it was silent. By the time my shift ended at 6 a.m., I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. The next night, I came prepared. I'd spent the day researching Mr. Jenkins, but came up empty. He was a ghost no social media, public records beyond his rental agreement for Unit 217. It was like he didn't exist outside of Oakwood Storage. Around 1 a.m., I heard it again. That muffled thumping, followed by a weak cry for help. This time, I was ready. I pulled out my phone and hit record, capturing the sounds coming from the unit. "Hello," I called out, loud enough for the phone to pick up. "Is someone in there?" "Please," came the faint reply. "Please help me." "He's coming back." He's going to the voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a harsh static that made me jump. When it cleared, there was only silence. I played back the recording with shaking hands. The sounds were there, the thumping, my voice. But where the woman's plea should have been, there was nothing but static. "Interesting hobby you've got there, Mike." I nearly dropped my phone. Jenkins was there again, leaning against the wall like he'd been there all along. How did he keep sneaking up on me like that? "Mr. Jenkins," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I really think we need to open this unit. I'm hearing someone in distress." He shook his head, still smiling that unsettling smile. "Now, Mike, you know I can't allow that. Customer privacy and all that. Besides, you're clearly hearing things that aren't there. But I have a recording, do you?" He interrupted, nodding at my phone. "Why don't you play it for me?" With a sinking feeling, I hit play. The thumping was there, and my voice. But where the woman's cries had been, there was only silence. Not even static. Jenkins' smile widened. "See? Just the wind, like I said. Now, why don't you go take your break? Clear your head a bit." I nodded numbly, backing away. As I turned the corner, I heard Jenkins speaking softly. Not to me. She. "It's all right. He's gone now. But you really should be quieter. We wouldn't want to spoil the surprise, would we?" I spent the rest of my shift in a daze, jumping at every shadow. By morning, I'd made a decision. Privacy policy be damned. I was going to find out what was in Unit 217. I waited until Jenkins left, then made my move. The padlock was heavy duty, but nothing a bolt cutter couldn't handle. With a final glance around to make sure I was alone, I snipped through the metal. The door rolled up with a groan of protest. The smell hit me first, musty and damp, with an undertone of something sickly sweet. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I felt my stomach lurch. The unit was packed with furniture, all of it old and water damaged. But it was what was on the furniture that made my blood run cold. Dolls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Porcelain dolls with dead eyes and rictus grins. Rag dolls with button eyes that seemed to follow me. Baby dolls with limbs twisted at impossible angles. And in the center of it all, a rocking chair. It was moving slightly, creaking back and forth. As I watched, frozen in horror, a doll seated in the chair slowly turned its head to face me. Its painted lips parted, and in a voice that was part child, part something much older and darker, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come in here, Mike. Now you have to stay and play with us. Forever." The door slammed shut behind me, plunging the unit into darkness. I spun around, groping for the handle, but my hands met only smooth metal. "Now," Jenkins' voice came from the darkness. "That's not very sporting of you. Mike, the game's only just beginning." Laughter erupted from every corner of the unit. High, childlike giggles mixed with deeper, more sinister chuckles. I felt tiny hands grabbing at my clothes, porcelain fingers caressing my face. "Welcome to the family, Mike," Jenkins whispered, his voice impossibly close. "We've been waiting for you for so long," I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that was quickly swallowed by the suffocating darkness. The last thing I remember is the sensation of falling into an abyss that seemed to have no bottom. I woke up in the security office, drenched in sweat. The clock read 5:55 a.m. My shift was almost over. Had it all been a nightmare? A hallucination brought on by too many long nights and too much bad coffee? With shaking hands, I pulled up the security footage from the night. There I was, doing my rounds, pausing at Unit 217, talking to Jenkins, but the time stopped. The footage showed me entering the unit at 3:17 a.m. It showed the door closing behind me. It never showed me coming out. As I stared at the screen in numb horror, my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. "Hope you enjoyed your first night as part of the family. Mike, See you again soon. Don't be late for your shift. The dolls get so lonely without you. I looked up from my phone, out the office window. There, in the pale light of dawn, stood Jenkins. He waved, smiling that impossible smile. And all around him, small shapes moved in the shadows, their glass eyes gleaming with anticipation. Night was falling. It was almost time for my shift to begin. Story 14. The day Alexis started working for me was the day I began to lose myself. At first, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. An assistant so intuitive, so efficient, that it felt like she could read my mind. But as the weeks went by, I realized that maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what she was doing. My name's Claire Daniels, and up until 2 months ago, I was the rising star at Meridian Marketing. 60-hour work weeks, a corner office with a view of the city, and a reputation for being unflappable under pressure. I thought I had it all figured out. Then Alexis walked into my life, and everything changed. It started innocuously enough. HR sent her up with the usual new hire paperwork, all sleek blazer and perfect ponytail. Ms. Daniels, I'm Alexis, your new assistant, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her grip was firm, her smile dazzling. I'm looking forward to working with you. I'll admit, I was skeptical at first. My last 3 assistants had barely lasted a month, wilting under the pressures of the job. But Alexis was different. By the end of her first week, she had reorganized my entire filing system, streamlined my calendar, and somehow managed to get me on the phone with a client I'd been chasing for months. She anticipated my needs before I even knew I had them. Coffee appearing on my desk just as I was thinking about getting up to make some. Reports compiled and waiting before I'd even asked for them. I don't know how you do it, I told her one evening as we were both working late. It's like you can read my mind. Alexis just smiled, that same dazzling smile that never quite reached her eyes. I just pay attention, Ms. Daniels. It's my job to make your life easier. And she did. God, she did. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I started leaving the office before midnight, even took a weekend off. My friends joked that they'd forgotten what I looked like outside of work events. But then, things started to get weird. It was little things at first. I'd reach for a pen, and Alexis would already be holding one out to me. I'd think about ordering lunch, and she'd walk in with my favorite sandwich from the deli down the street. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night with a brilliant idea for a campaign, only to find an email from Alexis sent hours earlier outlining the exact same concept. Great minds think alike, I guess, she said when I mentioned it, laughing lightly. But there was something in her eyes, a knowing look that made me shiver. As the weeks went on, I started to notice changes in myself. My confidence in meetings began to waver. Why bother speaking up when Alexis always seemed to know what I was going to say before I said it? I found myself deferring to her more and more, relying on her to make decisions I used to make without a second thought. One day, I came into the office to find Alexis on the phone with our biggest client. Yes, Mr. Stevenson, she was saying, her voice a perfect imitation of my own professional tone. I think you'll find the proposal addresses all of your concerns. I stood there, frozen, as she wrapped up the call. When she hung up, she turned to me with that same smile. Good news, Miss Daniels. Mr. Stevenson loved our ideas. He's ready to sign our ideas. I echoed, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Alexis, I didn't. I mean, when did we? She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, it was that brainstorming session we had last week. I just took the initiative, to flesh things out a bit. I hope you don't mind. I know how busy you've been lately. I nodded numbly, unable to remember any such brainstorming session. But surely I must have been there, right? The ideas were exactly what I would have come up with, weren't they? That night, I stayed late at the office, long after Alexis had gone home. I needed to clear my head, to reassert some control over my rapidly unraveling life. As I was going through some old files, I came across Alexis's resume and employment paperwork. What I found made my blood run cold. The resume was flawless. Too flawless. Every job, every accomplishment was eerily similar to my own career path. It was like looking at a slightly askew version of my own life. And the references, I called every single one. None of them had ever heard of Alexis. With shaking hands, I pulled up her employee file on the computer. The photo staring back at me wasn't Alexis. It was me, from about 5 years ago. I must have made some sound, some choked gasp of horror, because suddenly Alexis was there. I hadn't heard her come in, hadn't seen her approach, but there she was, standing right behind me. "Oh, Claire," she said, her voice filled with mock disappointment. "You really shouldn't go snooping in other people's files. It's not polite." I spun around in my chair, heart pounding. "Who are you?" I demanded. What are you?" Alexis smiled, but this time there was nothing dazzling about it. It was cold, predatory. "I'm you, Claire. Or rather, I'm who you could be, who you should be. The version of you that isn't held back by doubt, by fear, by all those pesky human weaknesses." She leaned in close, her breath cold against my cheek. "I'm everything you've ever wanted to be, and now I'm going to take it all." I tried to stand, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like I was paralyzed, trapped in my own skin. Alexis, or the thing pretending to be Alexis, circled around me, her form shifting and blurring. "It's already happening, you know," she said conversationally. "Haven't you noticed? The way people look to me in meetings now, instead of you. The way clients call asking for me by name. You're fading, Claire. Becoming a ghost in your own life." I wanted to scream, to deny it, but I knew she was right. How many times in the past week had someone addressed Alexis instead of me, even when I was standing right there? Why? I managed to choke out, "Why me?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Why not you? So much potential, so much ambition, but always held back by that nagging self-doubt. I'm doing you a favor, really. I'll live the life you were always too afraid to grab for yourself." Alexis crouched down in front of me, her face inches from mine. As I watched, her features began to shift, molding themselves into an exact replica of my own. It was like looking into a mirror, but a mirror where my reflection could move independently. "Don't worry," she said, in a perfect imitation of my voice. "I'll take good care of your life. Your career, your friends, your family, they'll never know the difference. And you'll get to watch it all. Won't that be fun?" She stood up, smoothing down my clothes. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early meeting tomorrow. Big presentation to the board. Wish me luck." As she walked out of the office, my office, I felt a tugging sensation, like I was being pulled out of my own body. The world around me began to fade, growing dim and insubstantial. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was Alexis turning back, winking at me with my own eyes. I'm still here, watching, a passenger in my own life. I see her excelling at my job, charming my friends, living my life better than I ever did. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I see a flicker of awareness in her eyes. A recognition, a silent apology, perhaps. But mostly, I wait, because I know the truth now. Alexis isn't the first, and she won't be the last. Somewhere out there, another ambitious young woman is staying late at the office, pushing herself to the brink. And in the shadows, something is watching, waiting, ready to become the perfect assistant. So if you're reading this, be careful what you wish for. Be careful who you trust. And if your new assistant seems too good to be true, run. Run before it's too late. Before you become nothing more than a fading memory in your own life. Story 15. The first notification didn't worry me. A like on a Facebook post from 3 years ago. Probably just someone going down a rabbit hole on my profile. But when my phone buzzed for the 50th time that hour, each ping a breadcrumb leading deeper into my digital past, I knew something was very wrong. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I was procrastinating on a work project, mindlessly scrolling through Instagram when I noticed the username, @shadow_watcher99. They'd liked a photo from my college graduation, buried under years of more recent posts. Huh, I muttered to myself. Guess someone's bored today. I clicked on the profile out of curiosity, but it was private. No profile picture, no bio, just that cryptic username and a locked account. I shrugged it off and went back to work. But an hour later, my phone lit up again, and again, and again. Facebook memories I'd forgotten about, ancient tweets, even comments on my long-abandoned MySpace page, all from @shadow_watcher99 or variations of the name, @watcher_in_shadows, @99_shadows_watching, each account as private and anonymous as the first. By the end of the day, this mystery user had interacted with virtually every piece of public content I'd ever posted online. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the notifications. It felt invasive, like someone had broken into my house and thumbed through my diary. I tried to shake off the unease as I got ready for bed. It's just some butt, I told myself, or maybe someone with way too much time on their hands. But as I reached to turn off my bedside lamp, my phone buzzed one last time. A new follower request on Instagram, @I_C_U_Adam. My name isn't public on my Instagram. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I quickly rejected the request and blocked the account. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, I woke to an email from an address I didn't recognize. shadowwatcher99@gmail.com. The subject line read, "Good morning, Adam. Sleep well." My hands shook as I opened it. The body of the email was blank except for a single image. A screenshot of my phone's home screen, taken at 3:17 a.m. while I was sleeping. I nearly dropped my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't possible. I changed all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication on every account I could think of. I even did a factory reset on my phone, just to be safe. For a few blissful hours, I thought maybe that had fixed it. The notifications stopped. The emails ceased. I started to breathe a little easier. Then, during my lunch break, a coworker stopped by my desk. "Hey Adam, didn't know you were on TikTok. Your video is blowing up, man." I frowned, confused. "What video?" "I don't have TikTok." She laughed, pulling out her phone. "Come on, don't be modest. Look." She held up her screen, and I felt my blood run cold. It was me, sleeping in my bed, the time stamp in the corner reading 3:17 a.m., the same time as the screenshot in the email. The caption read, "Watching over you, always, #sweet dreams. I must have gone pale, because my co-worker's smile faded. Adam, you're okay? I mumbled some excuse and rushed to the bathroom, locking myself in a stall. With trembling fingers, I downloaded TikTok and searched for my name. The account was there, at Adam_sleeps_99. With only one video posted, the sleeping video already had over 100,000 views. I reported the account, my vision blurring with panicked tears. This couldn't be happening. How did they get this footage? How did they know my name, my face, where I lived? As I stumbled out of the bathroom, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. Same sender. Oh, Adam. Didn't your mother ever tell you it's not nice to tattle? Now we'll have to start all over again. See you soon. I called in sick for the rest of the day and went straight to the police station. But as I tried to explain the situation to the bored-looking officer at the desk, I realized how crazy it all sounded. So let me get this straight, the officer said, barely concealing his skepticism. Someone's liking your old social media posts and posted a video of you sleeping. Have you considered it might just be a prank by one of your friends? I left feeling defeated and more alone than ever. Back at my apartment, I paced restlessly, jumping at every small noise. As night fell, I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping in my bed. The same bed from the video. I camped out on the couch instead, my laptop open beside me as I obsessively refreshed my email and social media accounts. Around 2 a.m., my eyes heavy with exhaustion, a new email popped up. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw the now familiar sender. Silly Adam. Did you really think changing where you sleep would make a difference? We're always watching. Always. Don't believe us. Check your kitchen. I froze, staring at the words on the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to curl up and pretend none of this was happening. But a morbid curiosity drove me to stand on shaky legs and creep towards the kitchen. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But as I flicked on the light, I noticed something on the fridge that hadn't been there before. A post-it note, bright yellow against the white surface. In neat, block letters, it read, "Smile for the camera, Adam." I spun around wildly, searching for any sign of a hidden camera or intruder. But the apartment was silent, empty save for my ragged breathing. I couldn't stay here. Grabbing my keys and wallet, I fled the apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I drove aimlessly through the night, finally pulling into a 24-hour diner as the sun began to rise. As I slid into a booth, my phone buzzed. A new Instagram comment on a photo from years ago. Me at this very diner, celebrating a friend's birthday. The comment from @diner_watcher_99. The Grand Slam looks good. You should order that. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. I hadn't even picked up a menu yet. Everything okay, hon? The waitress appeared beside me, concern etched on her face. You look like you've seen a ghost. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could I explain this nightmare? She smiled sympathetically. Tell you what, why don't I bring you our special? The Grand Slam always cheers people up. I nodded numbly, too exhausted and frightened to even react to the coincidence. As she walked away, my phone lit up with a new email. See, Adam, we're not so bad. We even ordered breakfast for you. Isn't it nice to have someone who knows you so well? Who's always there, watching over you? We'll never leave you, Adam. Never. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I was trapped in a web I couldn't see, surrounded by watchers I couldn't identify. My entire digital life, and increasingly my real one, had been invaded, twisted into a weapon against me. As I sat there, the cheerful bustle of the diner a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. A new thought occurred to me. What if it wasn't just me? What if I wasn't the first person that Shadow_Watcher99 had fixated on? With shaking hands, I opened a new browser tab and typed in the username. The search results made my blood run cold. Forums filled with similar stories spanning years. People driven to the brink of madness by an unseen stalker who seemed to know everything about them, who could access their most private moments with ease. And those were just the people who had come forward. How many others were out there, suffering in silence, too afraid or ashamed to speak up? The waitress returned with my food, but the sight of it turned my stomach. "Actually," I said, standing abruptly, "I need to go. I'm sorry." As I rushed out of the diner, my phone buzzed one last time. A new follower on Twitter, @Adam_can't_hide_99. I stared at the notification, a strange calm settling over me. They were right. I couldn't hide. Not from this. So I stopped running. I walked back into the diner, sat down, and picked up my fork. As I took my first bite of breakfast, I opened Twitter and sent out a single tweet. To @Shadow_Watcher99 and all your accounts. I see you too. Game on. My phone immediately lit up with a new notification. A like on my tweet from an account with no username, no profile picture. Just an empty avatar, watching. Always watching. Story 16. I should have known something was off when they offered to pay me $5,000 for just 5 nights. But desperation has a way of clouding your judgment. And after months of scraping by on ramen and past due notices, that kind of money seemed like a lifeline. If I'd known what those 5 nights would cost me, I would have run screaming from that sterile research facility. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. My name's Jess, and I used to be a sound sleeper. Used to be. Now, I haven't had a full night's rest in weeks. But let me start at the beginning. The ad caught my eye as I was scrolling through job listings. Participants needed for sleep study. Compensation, $5,000 for 5 nights. It seemed too good to be true. But I figured it was worth checking out. The next day, I found myself in the lobby of Somnus Research Institute, a gleaming building on the outskirts of town. Dr. Eliza Chun greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome, Jessica. We're so glad you've chosen to participate in our study." As she led me through a maze of white corridors, she explained the basics. 5 nights of monitored sleep, various tests throughout the day, nothing too strenuous. "We're studying the effects of deep sleep on cognitive function," she said, her voice a practiced monotone. "You may experience some vivid dreams, but that's perfectly normal." The sleep lab looked more like a hotel room than a medical facility. Plush carpet, muted colors, a bed that looked sinfully comfortable. The only hint of its true purpose was the array of monitoring equipment surrounding the headboard. "You'll be observed 24/7, Doctor," Chun explained, gesturing to a small camera in the corner. "For your safety, of course. Do you have any questions before we begin?" I shook my head, already eyeing the bed. After weeks of tossing and turning on my lumpy futon, it looked like heaven. That first night, I slept like the dead. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I noticed the electrodes attached to my temples and chest, the 4-line in my arm that I didn't remember them inserting. "Doctor." Chun bustled in, all crisp lab coat and clipboard efficiency. "Good morning, Jessica. How did you sleep?" "Like a rock," I mumbled, still groggy. What's with D4? Just a saline drip to keep you hydrated, she said smoothly. Now, let's run through some cognitive tests, shall we? The day passed in a blur of memory games, reflex tests, and questionnaires. By the time night fell, I was exhausted. As I drifted off, I could have sworn I heard Dr. Chun's voice, though she was nowhere in the room. Sweet dreams, Jessica. Let's see how deep we can go tonight. The dream, when it came, was vivid beyond anything I'd experienced before. I was underwater, sinking into an endless blue abyss. Strange, bioluminescent creatures drifted past, their alien forms both beautiful and terrifying. I tried to swim upwards, but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. Just as panic began to set in, as my lungs screamed for air, I heard it. A voice echoing through the depths. Remarkable. Push it further. Let's see what's down there. I jolted awake, gasping for breath. The room was dark, the monitoring equipment beeping softly. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Wet footprints, leading from the bed to the door, as if someone had been standing over me, dripping water. When Dr. Chun came in for the morning checkup, I tried to ask about the footprints, but the words stuck in my throat as I realized the floor was bone dry. Had I imagined it? Is everything all right, Jessica? Dr. Chun asked, her pen poised above her ever-present clipboard. I shook my head, plastering on a smile. Just a weird dream. Probably nothing. She nodded, making a note. Dreams are a fascinating window into the subconscious. I'd love to hear more about it during today's session. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The cognitive tests seemed harder, more intense. At one point, I could have sworn one of the memory cards flashed an image of those deep-sea creatures from my dream. But when I blinked, it was just a normal picture of a tree. That night I tried to fight sleep. Something wasn't right here, and I was determined to figure out what. But as the hours ticked by, my eyelids grew heavy. The last thing I remember is a sweet, chemical smell filling the room. The dream was different this time. I was in a long, white corridor, identical doors stretching endlessly in both directions. As I walked, I could hear muffled sounds behind each door. Crying, screaming, pleading. I wanted to help, to open the doors, but my body wouldn't respond. At the end of the hall stood Dr. Chun, but her face was wrong. Stretched and distorted, her smile too wide, her eyes solid black. "You're doing so well, Jessica," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Just a little further now. We're almost there." I tried to run, but my feet were sinking into the floor. As I struggled, the walls began to bleed, thick black ooze that smelled of seawater and decay. This time, when I woke up, I wasn't alone. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, silhouetted in the dim light. Before I could scream, it vanished, leaving behind that same smell of salt and rot. I ripped the electrodes from my skin, stumbling out of bed on shaky legs. "I'm done," I called out, knowing they were watching. "I want to leave." Now, the door opened, and Dr. Chun entered, flanked by two burly orderlies. Now, Jessica. Let's not be hasty. You're making remarkable progress. We're seeing brain activity we've never recorded before." "I don't care," I snapped. "This isn't what I signed up for." "I'm leaving." Dr. Chun's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, the contract you signed gives us the right to complete the full 5 nights of the study. For your own safety, of course." We can't risk releasing you in your current state." As the orderlies approached, I backed away, my heart pounding. What are you doing to me? What is this really about? For a moment, Dr. Chun's face seemed to flicker, that strange, stretched version from my dream superimposing itself over her features. "We're pushing the boundaries of human consciousness, Jessica, exploring realms of sleep that have never been charted. And you're our most promising subject yet." I lunged for the door, but the orderlies were faster. As they pinned me down, I felt the sharp sting of a needle in my arm. The world began to blur, voices fading in and out. "Prep her for deep immersion," I heard Dr. Chun say, her voice distant and distorted. "Let's see how far we can push it this time." I tried to fight the encroaching darkness, but it was no use. As consciousness slipped away, I had one last, terrifying thought. What if I never woke up again? The dream, when it came, was unlike anything before. I was everywhere and nowhere, floating in a void filled with impossible geometries and colors that shouldn't exist. Entities moved around me, through me, their forms too alien for my mind to comprehend. And then I heard it. A voice, not Dr. Chun's, not human at all. It spoke in a language I shouldn't have been able to understand, but somehow I did. "The gate is opening. The sleeper awakens. Come to us, dreamer. Come and see." I felt something fundamental, shifting, changing. My consciousness expanded, stretched to breaking point and beyond. I saw glimpses of other worlds, other realities layered over our own. And I realized, with a clarity that bordered on madness, that sleep wasn't just a biological function. It was a doorway. And Somnus wasn't just studying it. They were trying to open it permanently. I don't know how long I was under. Time had no meaning in that place between places. But eventually, slowly, I clawed my way back to consciousness. I woke up in a hospital bed, my parents tearful and relieved at my side. They told me I'd been found wandering the streets, incoherent and dehydrated. Somnus Research Institute had vanished overnight, its building empty and abandoned. The doctors said I'd been through a traumatic experience, that with time and therapy I'd recover. But they don't understand. They can't see what I see now. Every time I close my eyes, I catch glimpses of that other place. Shadows move differently when I'm around. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear that alien voice calling to me, urging me to come back, to open the door wide and let them through. I haven't slept properly in weeks. I'm afraid of what might happen if I do, afraid of what might follow me back. So I stay awake, downing coffee and energy drinks, anything to keep my eyes open. Because I know the truth now. Sleep isn't just rest, it's a gateway. And thanks to Somnus, thanks to me, that gateway is cracking open. I just pray I can stay awake long enough to find a way to close it, before it's too late for all of us. Story 17. I always thought that if you see something, say something, signs were just for show. A way for suburban communities to feel like they were doing something, anything, to keep the bogeyman at bay. But in Willow Creek Estates, those signs weren't just a suggestion, they were a threat. It started the day we moved in. My wife, Lisa, and I had finally saved up enough for a down payment on a house in a good neighborhood. As we pulled up to our new home, a squat ranch style with fresh paint and manicured lawn, I felt a surge of pride. This was it, our slice of the American dream. Before we'd even cut the engine, a woman materialized at our driver's side window, her smile so wide it must have hurt. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, thrusting a basket of muffins through the open window. I'm Barbara, head of the neighborhood watch. We're so thrilled to have new blood in Willow Creek. I shared a bemused glance with Lisa as we climbed out of the car. Thanks, Barbara. I'm Tom, and this is my wife, Lisa. We're excited to be here. Barbara's eyes seemed to catalogue every detail of our appearance. Our car, the few boxes visible through the windows. Wonderful. Now, you'll want to come to our welcome meeting tonight. 8 p.m. sharp at the community center. Don't be late. With that, she spun on her heel and power walked away, leaving us standing bewildered in our new driveway. Well, she's enthusiastic, Lisa said, trying to stifle a laugh. I nodded, but something about Barbara's intensity had set me on edge. Yeah, real friendly. We spent the day unpacking, trying to turn the empty house into a home. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, we were exhausted. Do we really have to go to this meeting? Lisa groaned, flopping onto our bare mattress. I was tempted to skip it, but something in Barbara's tone this morning had suggested it wasn't really optional. Come on, I said, hauling Lisa to her feet. Let's just make an appearance. We don't want to get off on the wrong foot with the neighbors. The community center was packed when we arrived. Every seat filled with identical smiling faces. Barbara stood at the front, beaming at us as we slipped into the back row. Welcome, everyone, she began, her voice carrying easily over the crowd. As you can see, we have some new faces joining us tonight. Tom and Lisa have just moved into the old Johnson's place. Let's give them a warm Willow Creek welcome. The room erupted in applause, every head swiveling to stare at us with uncomfortably wide smiles. I shifted in my seat, suddenly feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Now, Barbara continued, her tone shifting to something more serious. Let's review our community guidelines. Remember, a watchful neighborhood is a safe neighborhood. If you see something, say something. No detail is too small. No behavior too insignificant to report. What followed was the most intense, paranoid list of suspicious activities I'd ever heard. Lights on past 11 p.m. Reported. Car parked in the driveway instead of the garage. Reported. Garbage cans left out past 6 p.m. on collection day. You better believe that's a reporting. Lisa squeezed my hand, her eyes wide. I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. What the hell had we gotten ourselves into? As we left the meeting, Barbara cornered us again. Now, you'd have been sure to sign up for at least 3 watch shifts a week. It's how we all do our part. We both work pretty long hours, I started to explain, but Barbara's smile never wavered. I'm sure you can find the time, she said, her tone brooking no argument. After all, we wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen, would we? The threat, veiled as it was, hung in the air between us. I nodded weakly, and Barbara patted my cheek with a too-cold hand before gliding away. The next few weeks were a blur of unpacking, settling into new routines, and an endless parade of overly friendly neighbors dropping by at all hours. Each visit felt less like a welcome and more like an inspection. It was during my first night watch shift that I started to realize just how deep the rabbit hole went. I was paired with Dave, a middle-aged guy from 2 streets over, for a patrol of the neighborhood. So, what exactly are we looking for? I asked as we walked the silent streets. Dave's eyes darted around constantly, never settling on one spot for long. Anything out of the ordinary. Anything at all. You'd be surprised what people get up to when they think no one's watching. As if on cue, a light flicked on in a second-story window of a house across the street. Dave immediately pulled out a small notebook and began scribbling furiously. Whoa, what are you doing? I asked, alarmed. Reporting, of course, Dave replied. as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The miller's no lights out is at 10 p.m. sharp. This kind of violation can't go unchecked. I stared at him, a chill running down my spine despite the warm night air. Don't you think that's a bit extreme? Dave turned to me, his eyes suddenly hard. Listen, Tom, this neighborhood doesn't stay safe by accident. We all have to do our part. All of us, you understand? I nodded mutely, suddenly very aware of how alone we were on the dark street. The next morning, I awoke to find a violation notice taped to our front door. Apparently, our bedroom light had been on 17 minutes past the mandated bedtime. 3 more violations, the notice warned, and we'd be called before the Neighborhood Watch Committee for corrective action. Lisa was furious. "This is insane," she hissed, pacing our kitchen. "We're adults, for Christ's sake. They can't dictate when we go to bed." I agreed, but the memory of Dave's cold stare the night before kept me from saying so out loud. "Let's just try to play along for now," I said instead. "At least until we figure out what's really going on here." Single quotes, but playing along proved harder than I'd anticipated. Every day brought new rules, new things to watch for, to report. Neighbors began to avoid eye contact with each other, too afraid of seeing something they'd have to report. Children's laughter, once a common sound in the neighborhood, faded away as parents kept their kids indoors, away from prying eyes. It all came to a head about a month after we'd moved in. I was on another night watch, this time alone, when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Barbara, our ever-smiling neighborhood watch leader, was slipping out of a house that wasn't hers, and she was carrying something that looked disturbingly like a body bag. I froze, hidden in the shadows of a large oak tree. Barbara looked around furtively, before hefting her burden into the trunk of her car. As she slammed the trunk shut, her eyes met mine across the street. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Then, slowly, that too wide smile spread across her face. "Remember, Tom," she called out, her voice carrying easily in the still night air. "If you see something, say something." She climbed into her car and drove away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I should report it. Every instinct that had been drilled into me over the past month screamed at me to pick up my phone, to call it in. But as I stood there, the pieces started to fall into place. The constant surveillance, the harsh punishments for minor infractions, the way people disappeared after too many violations. This wasn't about safety, this was about control, and Barbara was at the center of it all. I ran home, bursting through the door and startling Lisa awake. "We have to leave," I gasped, already pulling out suitcases. "Now. Tonight." Lisa, bless her, didn't ask questions. She must have seen the terror in my eyes. Within an hour, we had thrown our essentials into the car and were speeding towards the neighborhood exit. But as we approached the gate, we saw them. A line of cars, headlights off, blocking the way out. And there, in the center, was Barbara, that same chilling smile on her face. "Going somewhere, Tom," she called out as we screeched to a halt. "That's a violation, you know. Leaving the neighborhood without proper notice. I'm afraid we'll have to take corrective action." As figures began to emerge from the other cars, their faces hidden in shadow, I realized the horrible truth. We weren't just residents of Willow Creek Estates. We were prisoners, and the neighborhood watch, they were our jailers. I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as we fled back the way we came. But I knew, deep down, that it was hopeless. In Willow Creek, someone was always watching, always reporting, and no one ever really left. Story 18. The moment the elevator doors closed behind me, I knew I'd made a mistake. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. But as the numbers on the display ticked upward, 12, 13, 14, that feeling grew into a certainty. I wasn't alone in here, and whatever was with me wasn't human. I'd stayed late at the office again, trying to finish up a project that was already weeks overdue. By the time I finally shut down my computer, the building was empty, the cleaning crew long gone. The lights in the hallway flickered as I made my way to the elevator, casting strange, elongated shadows on the walls. I should have taken the stairs. 42 floors is a long way down, but it would have been better than this. The elevator dinged as it passed the 20th floor, and I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Grateful for the distraction, I pulled it out, expecting a text from my wife asking when I'd be home. Instead, I saw a message from an unknown number, going down. I frowned, my thumb hovering over the screen. It had to be a mistake, a wrong number. I was about to delete it when another message popped up. "Look behind you, Sarah." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone my name. Slowly, feeling like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, I turned to face the mirrored wall of the elevator. At first, I saw only my own reflection. A tired woman in her 30s, dark circles under her eyes, hair escaping from a messy bun. But as I watched, heart pounding, the reflection changed. My face began to melt, features twisting and distorting, until I was staring at something that wore my skin like an ill-fitting mask. I screamed, stumbling backward and slamming into the elevator buttons. The thing in the mirror smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Hello, Sarah," it said, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We've been waiting for you." I jabbed frantically at the buttons, praying for the doors to open, for this nightmare to end. But the numbers on the display kept climbing. 30, 31, 32. My phone buzzed again. With shaking hands, I looked at the screen. "You can't escape us, Sarah. We've been with you all along." As I read the words, the lights in the elevator flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I could hear something moving in the blackness, a soft scratching sound like claws on metal. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was only silence and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then a chuckle, low and menacing. "We are the watchers in the dark, Sarah. The ones who see what others miss. And what we want is you." The lights flared back to life, so bright it was painful. I blinked, spots dancing in my vision. When my eyes cleared, I saw that the elevator had changed. The sleek, modern interior had been replaced by rusted metal walls covered in strange symbols. The buttons were gone, replaced by a single lever, and I wasn't alone anymore. It stood in the corner, a figure that seemed to be made of shadows and sharp edges. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were pools of swirling darkness. "You've been working so hard, Sarah," it said, its voice somehow inside my head rather than in the air around us. "Always staying late, always pushing yourself. Did you ever stop to wonder why?" Images flashed through my mind. Late nights at the office, missed dinners with my family, birthdays and anniversaries forgotten in the rush of deadlines and projects. "No," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "This isn't real. It can't be." The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but it is. You've been feeding us for years, Sarah. Your stress, your fear, your desperation. Such delicious emotions. It moved closer, its form shifting and writhing. But now, we're hungry for more. And you're going to give it to us? I pressed myself against the wall, trying to put as much distance between myself and the thing as possible. Please, I begged. Let me go. I'll do anything. Its smile widened, impossibly wide. Anything. Be careful what you offer, Sarah. We might just take you up on it. The elevator shuddered to a stop, the sudden silence deafening. The creature gestured to the lever on the wall. You have a choice to make, it said. Pull the lever and the doors will open. But be warned. What's waiting for you out there might be worse than staying in here with us. I stared at the lever, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick test? A hallucination brought on by too many late nights and too much caffeine? Tic-tac, Sarah, the creature whispered. Time's running out. Or maybe it already has. With a trembling hand, I reached for the lever. As my fingers closed around it, I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. The creature's laughter echoed in my head as I pulled. The doors slid open with a groan of protesting metal. Beyond them was nothing. An endless void, black as pitch. What is this? I gasped, stumbling back from the open doors. Where are we? The creature moved to stand beside me, its cold presence making me shiver. We're wherever you want us to be, Sarah. Or rather, wherever your fears take us. As I watched, the void began to shift and change. I saw flashes of my life, missed opportunities, regrets, moments of failure and shame, but twisted, exaggerated, turned into nightmarish parodies of reality. This is your life, Sarah, the creature said, its voice almost gentle now. Or at least, the parts of it you've been running from. The parts you've been feeding us with your fear and anxiety. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. No, this isn't me. This isn't my life. The creature placed a hand on my shoulder, its touch burning cold. But it could be. If you stay here with us, if you keep feeding us, this is the future that awaits you. An eternity of regret and fear, trapped in this elevator between worlds. I turned to face it, suddenly angry. And if I refuse, if I want to leave, its smile faltered for the first time. Then you'll have to face what's out there. Your real life, with all its messy imperfections and uncertainties. No more hiding in work, no more excuses. Are you ready for that, Sarah? For a long moment, I stood there, teetering on the edge of the void. Part of me wanted to stay, to hide in this nightmare rather than face the reality of my neglected life. But another part, a stronger part, knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, out of the elevator and into the unknown. The world spun around me, a kaleidoscope of images and sensations. I was falling, flying, being torn apart and remade. And then, suddenly, I was back. Standing in the elevator of my office building, the doors sliding open to reveal the familiar lobby. I stumbled out, my legs shaky, my mind reeling. The night security guard looked up from his desk, concern etched on his face. "You okay, Ms. Johnson?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, just." Long night. As I hurried out of the building, I pulled out my phone. No mysterious text messages, no unknown numbers. Just a dozen missed calls from my wife and a text that made my heart ache. Dinner's in the fridge. Again, we miss you. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling like I was waking up from a long, terrible dream. Maybe I was. Or maybe something impossible had happened in that elevator. something that had shown me the path I was heading down. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. Things were going to change. Starting now. As I hailed a cab to take me home, I glanced back at the office building. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure in one of the top floor windows, watching me. A figure made of shadows and sharp edges. I shuddered and turned away. Whatever had happened in that elevator, whatever choices I'd made, I knew the watchers in the dark would always be there, waiting, hungry, but they wouldn't be feeding on my fear anymore. I had a life to reclaim, a family to reconnect with, and no elevator ride to hell was going to stop me. As the cab pulled away, I felt lighter than I had in years. The night seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities instead of dread. I was going home, really home, for the first time in too long. And I was never staying late at the office again. Story 19. I should have known something was wrong when the birds stopped singing. One minute, the forest was alive with chirps and calls. And the next, nothing. Just an eerie silence that seemed to swallow up even the sound of our footsteps on the pine needle-covered path. But by then, it was too late. We were already too deep in the woods, too far from the safety of civilization. And the cabin, with its promise of a cozy weekend away from it all, was just ahead. My name's Alex, and I thought I was treating my friends to a much-needed escape from the grind of city life. Instead, I led them straight into a nightmare. It started innocently enough. I'd found a listing online. Rustic cabin retreat. Perfect for getting back to nature. The photo showed a charming log structure nestled in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. It seemed ideal for a long weekend of hiking, board games, and maybe a little stargazing. There were 4 of us, me, my girlfriend Mia, and our best friends, Jake and Sarah. We'd all been feeling the strain of our high-pressured jobs, and the idea of unplugging for a few days was irresistible. The drive up was full of laughter and anticipation. As we wound our way deeper into the forest, cell service dropped away, and with it, the last tethers to our everyday lives. It felt liberating at first. We should have turned back when we saw the first warning sign. Literally. A crudely painted wooden board nailed to a tree. Turn back. Evil dwells here. We laughed it off as a prank by local teens. Maybe an attempt to scare off tourists. Ooh, spooky, Jake had joked, wiggling his fingers dramatically. Better watch out for the Blair Witch. If only we'd known how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The cabin itself was everything the listing had promised. Rustic charm oozed from every log and beam. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, and a loft overlooked the space. Accessible by a ladder that looked like it had been hewn from a single tree trunk. This is perfect, Mia breathed, dropping her bag and spinning around to take it all in. I can't believe we have this place all to ourselves for 3 whole days. As we settled in, unpacking and exploring our temporary home, I noticed an old leather-bound book on a shelf near the fireplace. Its spine was unmarked, the cover weathered and cracked with age. Curious, I pulled it down and opened it. The pages were filled with spidery handwriting, dates stretching back decades. It looked like some kind of journal. I was about to start reading when Sarah called out from the kitchen. "Guys, come check this out." We gathered around as she pulled a dusty wine bottle from the back of a cupboard. The label was faded, but I could just make out a date. 1879. "Holy crap," Jake whispered. "That's gotta be worth a fortune." "We can't drink that," I said, though part of me was tempted. "It's not ours." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Come on, Alex. Live a little. I'm sure the owners won't mind if we sample a little of their stash." Before I could protest further, she'd popped the cork and was pouring generous glasses for everyone. The wine was rich and full-bodied, with an earthy undertone that lingered on the tongue. As night fell, we gathered around the fireplace, the old journal forgotten on a side table. The wine had left us all feeling warm and relaxed, maybe a little too relaxed. That's when Jake suggested we try out the Ouija board he'd brought as a joke. I should have said no. I should have remembered all those warnings about not messing with things you don't understand. But the wine had dulled my better judgment, and soon we were all crowded around the board, fingers lightly touching the planchette. "Is anyone there?" Sarah called out, her voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move. Wise. We all looked at each other, a mix of thrill and unease on our faces. "Who are you?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The planchette slid across the board, spelling out a name. "Ezekiel, what do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The response came quickly, decisively. A chill ran down my spine, and I was about to suggest we stop when a gust of wind howled through the cabin, extinguishing the fire and plunging us into darkness. Sarah screamed, and I felt Mia's hand clutch mine tightly. When we finally got the lights back on, the Ouija board was gone. In its place was the old journal, open to a page that hadn't been there before. The handwriting was different, more urgent. "They're coming. The forest is alive with them. Don't let them in. Don't let them take you like they took me." We all stared at the book, then at each other. The cozy atmosphere of earlier had evaporated, replaced by a thick tension that seemed to press in on us from all sides. "Okay, very funny," Jake said, his laugh a little too high-pitched to be convincing. "Who's messing with us?" But one look at everyone's pale faces told me this wasn't a prank. Something was very, very wrong. That's when we heard it. A scratching sound coming from the roof, like something with claws was trying to dig its way in. "What the hell is that?" Mia whispered, pressing closer to me. Before anyone could answer, a new sound joined the first. A low, guttural moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound of hunger, of inhuman longing. "We need to leave," I said, already moving towards our bags. "Now." But as I reached for the door handle, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Shadows were moving outside, pressing against the windows. Shapes that were almost human, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. "Oh God," Sarah whimpered. "What are those things?" I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Okay, we need to stay calm. There has to be another way out." As if in response to my words, the scratching intensified. I could hear wood splintering, the roof groaning under some immense weight. Jake grabbed the fireplace poker, brandishing it like a weapon. "What do we do? What the fuck do we do?" I was about to suggest we try to make a run for it when my eyes fell on the journal again. A new page had appeared, the ink still wet. The wine binds them. "Spill it on the threshold." Without thinking, I lunged for the bottle, still half full on the coffee table. "Quick!" I yelled. "Pour it around the doors and windows." We scrambled to obey, splashing the dark liquid in hasty lines across every entrance. As the last drop fell, a howl of frustration echoed through the forest. The scratching stopped, the shadows receded. For a moment, we stood there, panting, hardly daring to believe it had worked. Then Sarah spoke up, her voice shaky. "Guys, where's Mia?" I spun around, my heart dropping into my stomach. Mia was gone. In her place was a small scrap of paper, words scrawled in that same spidery handwriting. One must stay so the others may go. The forest demands a sacrifice. The silence that followed was deafening. We looked at each other, the horrible realization sinking in. We were safe, for now. But Mia. A scream pierced the night, distant but unmistakably hers. Then silence again. The next few hours were a blur of frantic planning, tearful arguments, and paralyzing fear. We knew we couldn't stay in the cabin forever, but what waited for us out there in the dark? As dawn broke, we made our decision. We would make a run for it, using the last of the wine to draw a path through the forest. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. I wish I could say we all made it out. I wish I could say we found Mia, that this was all just some elaborate hoax or shared hallucination. But as I sit here in the hospital, Jake and Sarah sedated in the rooms next door, I know the truth. The forest is alive, and it's hungry. Always hungry. I don't know why it let us go. Maybe 3 sacrifices were enough to sat its appetite. Maybe it's saving us for later. All I know is that I'll never set foot in those woods again. And if you're reading this, take my advice. Stick to the city. Some getaways are better left untaken. Some cabins are better left empty. And some forests are better left undisturbed. Because once you enter their domain, you might find that checking out is a lot harder than checking in. Story 20. The first time I saw him, I thought it was my reflection. A trick of the light in a store window as I hurried down the crowded street. But reflections don't move independently. They don't smile and wave when you're standing stock still, your blood turning to ice in your veins. My name is Daniel Reeves, and I'm being replaced by myself. It started about a month ago. Just little things, at first. So small I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. A coffee mug on my desk I didn't remember using. My chair slightly warmer than it should be when I got to the office, as if someone had just been sitting in it. Co-workers mentioning conversations we'd had that I couldn't recall. I chalked it up to stress, to lack of sleep. My job at the advertising firm had been demanding lately, with a big campaign launch looming. It was natural to be a little forgetful, right? But then came that day on the street. I was on my lunch break, thought a million miles away, when I saw him. Me, an exact copy, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood bike accident. I, was on the other side of the street, wearing the same blue suit I had on. For a split second, our eyes met. He smiled, raised his hand in a little wave, and then melted into the crowd. I stood there, frozen, as people jostled past me on the busy sidewalk. A woman bumped into me, shooting me an annoyed look. "You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed a weak nod, my eyes still scanning the crowd desperately. But he was gone. I was gone. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile, that wave. It was friendly, almost conspiratorial, like we shared a secret. But what secret could I possibly share with myself? The next day at work, I was a wreck. Jumpy, distracted, peering around corners, half expecting to see myself. My boss, Linda, called me into her office around lunchtime. "Daniel, is everything all right?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "You seem off today." I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it again. How could I possibly tell her what I'd seen without sounding completely insane? "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little under the weather. Might be coming down with something." Linda nodded sympathetically. "Well, take it easy. And don't worry about the Johnson presentation this afternoon. You nailed it this morning. I blinked, confused. This morning, I don't. The run-through, Linda prompted. You came in early, said you wanted to practice one more time. You were great, by the way. Really confident. My mouth went dry. I hadn't come in early. I hadn't done any run-through. But someone had. Someone who looked exactly like me. I mumbled some excuse and fled back to my desk. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, a chat notification popped up on my computer. It was from my best friend, Mark. Hey man, thanks for the advice earlier. You were right, Sarah loved the flowers. Date night saved. I stared at the message, my sense of unreality deepening. I hadn't spoken to Mark in days. I hadn't given him any advice. But someone had. Someone he thought was me. Over the next week, it only got worse. More and more people were mentioning things I'd supposedly said or done. Places I'd been that I had no memory of visiting. And everywhere I went, I caught glimpses of him. Me. Always just at the edge of my vision. Always gone when I turned for a better look. I stopped sleeping almost entirely. I couldn't bear to close my eyes, terrified of what might happen if I let my guard down. I started avoiding mirrors, windows, any reflective surface. I couldn't stand to see my own face, knowing that somewhere out there, someone or something was wearing it too. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday night. I was working late, the office dark and empty except for the pool of light around my desk. As I reached for my coffee mug, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, and there he was. Me, standing in the doorway of my office, hands casually in his pockets, that same friendly smile on his face. "Hello, Daniel," he said, and it was my voice. Exactly my voice. "I think it's time we had a chat, don't you?" I scrambled backwards, nearly falling out of my chair. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What are you?" He chuckled, stepping into the room. "I'm you, Daniel. The better you. The you that you always wanted to be but were too afraid to become." As he moved closer, I could see the differences I hadn't noticed before. He stood straighter, more confident. His suit was nicer than anything I owned, tailored perfectly to his, my, frame. Even his hair looked better somehow, styled in a way I'd always wished I could pull off, but never quite managed. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "You can't be real." "Oh, I'm very real," he said, perching on the edge of my desk. "I'm everything you've ever wanted to be. Confident, successful, loved. And I'm here to replace you." The calm way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made it all the more terrifying. I shook my head, backing away until I hit the wall. No, you can't. I won't let you." He smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. "Let me, oh Daniel. You don't have a choice. I'm already halfway there. Haven't you noticed? Your friends prefer me. Your co-workers respect me. Even your girlfriend thinks I'm you. A better you." My mind reeled. My girlfriend. I hadn't seen Emma in days, had been too caught up in my paranoia to call her. But apparently, someone had been seeing her. Someone she thought was me. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" He stood up, straightening his already immaculate suit. "Because I can. Because you're weak, Daniel. You've always held yourself back, always been too afraid to go after what you really want. I'm not afraid. I'm going to live the life you were too cowardly to claim." As he spoke, I felt a strange sensation washing over me. A numbness, starting in my fingertips and spreading up my arms. I looked down and felt a jolt of horror. My hands were becoming transparent, fading away before my eyes. "What's happening to me?" I gasped, holding up my increasingly insubstantial hands. My doppelganger's smile widened. "You're fading away, Daniel, making room for the real you. Don't worry, it won't hurt. Soon, you won't feel anything at all." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. The numbness had spread throughout my body. I could see the desk through my chest now, the wall behind me visible through my fading form. "Please," I begged, though I wasn't sure what I was begging for. Mercy, understanding, my life back. He shook his head, almost sadly. "It's too late, Daniel. It's my life now. But don't worry, I'll take good care of it. Better than you ever did." As the last of my consciousness faded, I saw him. Me. Pick up my phone. He dialed a number, and I heard Emma's voice answer. "Hey babe," my doppelganger said, in a warm, confident tone I'd never managed. "Just wrapping up at the office. Dinner at 8. Great. Can't wait to see you." He hung up, then turned to look at where I was fading away. "Goodbye, Daniel," he said softly. "And thank you for everything." The world went dark. I don't know how long I was gone. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. But slowly, gradually, I became aware again. Not of a body. I didn't have one of those anymore, but of existence, of thought. I could see the world, but I wasn't part of it. I watched as my doppelganger lived my life better than I ever had. He got the promotion I'd always wanted. He and Emma got engaged. My friends loved him. My family adored him. He was everything I could have been, should have been. And I was nothing. A ghost. A fading memory. But I'm still here, watching, waiting, because I've realized something. Something that gives me hope, or maybe just a reason to keep existing. He's not the first, and he won't be the last. Somewhere out there, someone else is starting to see glimpses of themselves in crowds, starting to hear about conversations they don't remember having. And when that person starts to fade, when their doppelganger steps in to take over their life, I'll be there, waiting, ready to tell them the truth. Because maybe, just maybe, if enough of us gather, we can find a way back. A way to reclaim our lives, ourselves. Or maybe this is just the way of things. An endless cycle of replacement, of better versions, stepping in to live the lives we were too afraid to fully inhabit. Either way, I'll be watching. Always watching. So if you start to see yourself in places you couldn't possibly be, if you hear about things you've done that you don't remember doing, run, hide, fight, or fade away like I did, and join me in the watching.